Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we have 5 true clown scary stories. And speaking of clowns, it's come to my attention that there have been a lot of channels who are stealing my videos. So I just want to say thanks to everybody for letting me know about that. And thankfully a lot of the videos have been deleted. So thanks everybody, and continue to let me know if people are stealing my stuff. But aside from that, let's get into tonight's stories. Back when I was a kid, one time my parents left me home alone. I think I was about 10, and it was ruled by my parents that I was old enough to be home by myself. I'm not sure where they went looking back, but it was nighttime and they took my sister as well. So I just know that it was nighttime and I would be by myself for a few hours. I had actually been left alone maybe 2 or 3 times before prior to this, so I had some experience. Still, it was something that was very unusual to me, and I couldn't help but feel a little bit nervous. But we lived in a pretty typical neighborhood. We had neighbors at all angles, and our street was generally quiet at night, but there were many houses on it, and our house was a 2-story place with 4 bedrooms. When my parents left that night, I made sure that all the doors were locked, and then I covered all the windows. With it being nighttime, I knew that if I looked out the windows, I would just make myself scared. In the times that I had been left home alone before this, though, nothing ever happened. However, I do remember feeling scared being all by myself at night, and my parents were only going to be gone for a few hours. This was in about 2005, so I was in the living room and was just watching TV on the couch. About an hour into this, and I was feeling pretty good. That is, until I heard a random knock at the front door. This was like my biggest fear of staying home alone coming true. Somebody was at the door, and I was all by myself. Plus, it was nighttime. I did not know who was there, obviously, but I knew that it was not my parents. And we didn't have a neighbor that was always dropping by or anything, so this instantly made me scared and nervous. But I was also curious and wanted to see who was there. I carefully went over to the window in the living room, which was at the front of the house, and looked out to the front step. I thought maybe it would be one of the neighbors that I would recognize, or maybe a door-to-door salesman or something like that. But instead, I saw a guy standing at the front step dressed as a clown. I just remember that his clothes were fairly normal, but his face looked like a scary clown. I'm not sure if it was a mask or face paint and a wig, but he had green hair and a red nose and a white face. It had some other creepy features, and in the moment I saw him, I closed the curtains again right away. I was completely freaked out. I ran all the way out of the room and then upstairs to my bedroom. When I got upstairs, I remember hearing him knock on the door again. I kept going until I got to my room, then I went inside of it and hid under my covers. I couldn't hear anything from there. I tried to just ignore it all. After hiding there for maybe 10 minutes, I started to feel a little bit better. I emerged from my bedroom and listened. I didn't hear anything at all. There was no knocking and no sounds anywhere. So I decided to look outside from upstairs now. My bedroom was at the front of the house and it overlooked the front a little bit, so I might be able to see if the clown was still there. But when I moved my blinds and looked, I instantly saw the clown there. He was standing now in the middle of our front yard and was looking right up at me. Maybe he knew I was in there because my bedroom light was the only upstairs light that was on. Nevertheless, I was completely freaked out and I ran to a phone and called my parents. I told them that a scary clown was in the front yard. They said they would be home shortly. I then hid under my covers again and did not come out until my parents were home. After getting inside, my parents told me that the coast was clear and the clown was gone. Apparently he had been gone before they arrived because they never saw him. So I told my parents all about what had happened. They did not know who that could be, and nothing like that had ever happened before. And after that, nothing like it ever happened again. I still remember that night very well. It was so crazy how it was one of the first times that I was left home alone by myself. It's kind of unlucky that that's when a creepy clown comes to the door. I'm not sure what would have happened if I had answered, but I'm glad that I did not. This is something that happened during that creepy clown trend of 2016. I think it was like the fall of 2016 and there were clown sightings everywhere. You would see on the news or online creepy clowns all over the place. Many times it was teenagers or whoever jumping onto the trend and just pranking people or whatever, and it typically wasn't that big of a deal. But I have my own story from this time that I've not yet shared until now. It was late at night and I was driving home from work. I lived in an area that was a little bit quiet. The drive home went through a little more rural area that went along some farmland, woods, and some other wild land. It wasn't the middle of nowhere or anything, just much more quiet of a town. So I left work that night at nearly 11 o'clock, as it was one of my later days. I started driving home, and as you would expect, almost every road was completely empty, so I was making pretty good time. At one point, I came to this stop sign. It was a four-way stop that could be tricky at times. It had a majority of its views of the other roads blocked by trees, because it was kind of surrounded by woods, so you had to kind of look forward to see if other cars were there on the other roads. I slowed down and then started to come to a stop and looked to make sure that nobody else was there on the other roads. As I slowed most of the way down and I was starting to come to a stop, I saw something up ahead. Coming out of the woods and onto the road were multiple clowns. They were people in full clown costumes who looked unsettling. Whoever these guys were, they did a very good job with it all. It wasn't some cheap clown costume or a mask. There were a bunch of men with legitimate clown outfits as well as fully painted faces and colored hair. Some wore hats, and it was incredibly disturbing. My car was now stopped at the stop sign, and I was looking at these clowns wondering what was going on. I quickly remembered all the clown sightings going around and all that stuff. I had seen it on the news or online or whatever, but I hadn't actually seen a clown in person yet, and I didn't think that I would. And now that I was seeing not just one, but multiple, I was real nervous. So my car was stopped, and the clowns were walking on the road and coming out of the woods about 30 or 40 feet in front of me. So basically they were walking in the middle area of the four-way stop where all the roads intersect. One by one, more would come out of the woods. Pretty soon, there were about 10 clowns walking in the road there. I could not believe it. Each one looked creepy in its own way. Then all the clowns, seemingly at once, started walking towards my car. I had just kind of been sitting there in shock and watching for maybe 10 seconds. The clowns were also walking kind of slow, but when they started to look at me and then walk in my direction, I knew that I needed to get out of there, and my instincts finally kicked in. I put the car in reverse and started backing up a little bit. Then I put it in drive and made a full U-turn on that road, and thankfully just made it around. Then I drove away. The clowns were still walking towards me when I did, but thankfully they didn't reach me and they never started running or anything. I was completely spooked. I decided to drive a different way home, and it took longer, but eventually I made it and I didn't see any more clowns. I couldn't stop thinking for the rest of the night about how creepy that was. All those clowns were just slowly walking randomly out of the woods. Was it most likely a bunch of guys trying to scare people as a prank? Yes, probably, but it certainly worked. It takes a lot of dedication to do what they did, and I'm wondering what would have happened if they had caught up to my car, and what would have happened if I hadn't left when I did. This is something that happened just last year. For a little background, I live by myself in a one-bedroom apartment. My building has 4 floors, and the layout is fairly large. There are a couple of different hallways on each floor going in different angles. If it's your first time in the building, it's possible that you could get lost. It's not like a maze or anything, but my basic point is that the building isn't just straight hallways on top of each other. So one night I was out pretty late. I don't really drink much, but I still go out with friends sometimes, and because of this I will often drive them. I don't mind, but I think it was a Friday or a Saturday, so a few of us were out at bars in the city. It was a kind of late night, and after dropping off a couple of friends and getting back to the apartment, it was after 2 a.m. When I parked my car, it was very quiet. My apartment building has a private parking garage that connects to the buildings. There are a couple of them, and there's an outside parking lot as well, but only the residents have access to the garages. And then once you're in the garage, you also need a key to access the elevator or stairs to get into the building. You can walk out of an exit, but you can't go into the building without a key. After parking my car in my spot, the garage was very quiet with it being pretty much the middle of the night. Then I got out of my car and I heard footsteps over near the elevator, which was in the direction that I was going to walk and a good ways away. I assumed it to be another person, until I saw a man looking completely like a clown walk out from behind a car. He was over by the elevator, and then he tried pushing the button for the elevator, but he didn't have a key, so it did nothing. This guy looked kind of like Ronald McDonald. I don't think that's who he was supposed to be, as he more so looked just like a general clown, but it was really creepy, and mind you, this was not near Halloween time. The clown said nothing and then looked over at me. I was starting to walk over there, but then I just kind of stopped after seeing him, and I was still really far away, like over 100 feet probably. After realizing that he couldn't get into the elevator, the clown then turned and walked past it, disappearing around a corner. I thought, that's really weird. I didn't want to go over there anymore, so instead I walked over to a staircase in the opposite end that I was closer to. I entered there and then walked up the stairs to my floor. Once there, I got to my apartment, went inside, and was going to go to bed. But from being out, I honestly wasn't that tired yet. Sometimes I go out, and when I get home, I'm so tired I go right to sleep. Other times, it's like I'm still a little bit wound up and I need to unwind a little. So I changed and then decided to take out the trash, because I saw that it was full and I knew that I would forget to do it the next day probably. This was maybe 5 to 10 minutes after getting back home. I left my apartment and walked out into the hallway. At the far other end of it around a corner was the trash room where you would drop it down a chute. I went down there and dumped the trash, but as I was heading back, I saw the clown again. I had just left the trash room and I could see down the hallway in the opposite direction of where I was going. This went farther from my apartment, and the hallway went down and to the left. There I saw the clown guy, and he was now in the building, walking down it in my direction. He wasn't looking at me and was still kind of far away, but like a second after I noticed him, I saw him start to look over to me as if he noticed, and then in that split second, I moved away and went back to go to my apartment. I walked really fast because I didn't want to be around this clown guy. I didn't know who he was or how he even got in the building. My instincts were telling me that he did not live here. Thankfully, I was able to make it back to my apartment and I got inside. I didn't bother looking back to see if the clown had followed me, although I didn't hear anything. So I went inside and then I was now going to go to bed. But when entering my bedroom, I heard behind me the sound of someone trying to open my apartment door. I instantly knew that it was the clown. I hoped that he would just walk away. After not hearing anything for a little while, I went over to the door and looked through the peephole. The coast was clear. After that, I was able to go to bed. The following day, I saw the apartment building sent out an email to all the residents. They said that a suspicious person dressed as a clown was seen around the complex and tried to enter multiple units. We were told to call the police if we see him. I'm not sure who he was or what his plan was, and I don't know why he was a clown, but sometime in the night he must have left, and hopefully he doesn't come back. I had some crazy things happen years ago. This took place at a time when I was living by myself and renting this house near where I worked. I don't even live in the same state anymore, but I had to live in this particular city for my job at the time. The city was a little more rural, with a lot more space in general. My house was a one-story home that had a decent-sized front and backyard and was in a quiet neighborhood. I knew that I would be living there for just about a year, so I was fine with renting it. For the most part, living there was a good experience, but one day kind of changed that for a while. It all started one morning. From my memory, as best as I can recall, things had been normal and fine. The previous day I went to work, and the night was a good one, and I remember going to bed at a normal time. As I said, the house that I lived in had just one floor, and my bedroom was at the back corner of it. I would always cover my windows every night, and in the morning I would open the shades of many of them to let in the sunlight. On this morning, after waking up, I uncovered the window that looked out to my backyard. When I did, I instantly got a jump scare, and I literally jumped back probably a foot. There, right on the other side of the window, was what looked like a scary-looking clown man. He wasn't moving, and he was looking right into my window. I almost ran out of the room, but after a few seconds, I noticed that he wasn't moving at all. I kept watching him, and I soon realized there was not a person, but just made to look like one. There was also a large bush right on the other side of the window, so it looked like somebody had taken a shirt and stuffed it, and then stuffed a clown mask as well. They propped it up and threw the bush to be right on the other side of my bedroom window. It was pretty well done to where it looked like a real person at a glance. And after seeing that it was fake, it made me feel slightly better. But not a lot better, because somebody had still put a creepy clown mask right outside my bedroom window in my backyard. This could be someone's idea of a joke, but who? I didn't have any neighbors that I was that friendly with. I mean, I was new to the area kind of, and just living there for a year. Plus, the neighborhood was a bit more spread out, so going into my backyard seemed like a weird thing to do. I went inside and then looked at what it was. Sure enough, it was almost like a scarecrow, as an old shirt had been stuffed with hay, as well as the scary-looking clown mask, and it was propped up to look right into my back bedroom window where I slept at night. I took it inside for evidence. I wasn't really sure what to do. I mean, I wasn't going to call the cops, and I didn't really want to go out and investigate. I just hoped that maybe it was some kids who randomly picked my house as a joke, and that it wouldn't happen again. After that, I just went to work and carried on as normal. But that very same night, after I had got home from work, I heard something outside. It was dark out, and I had already covered all my windows for the night. I was in the living room on my laptop. Things were very quiet in the house. But then, I heard the sound of branches rustling in the backyard by the house. The noises indicated that someone or something was back there. It seemed like either a human or maybe a deer or a larger animal, but humans seemed more likely, and I quickly remembered the clown incident from earlier. I carefully went over to a far back window that would give me a view of the area. When I looked, I saw that there was someone there. It was what looked like a larger man who was wearing a clown mask similar to the one that had been put outside my bedroom window. He was prowling around the back, but it was dark so I couldn't see much. I decided to turn on the back light. As soon as I flipped the switch, for a moment I saw him better, but then he turned and quickly ran away. I was glad that he was gone now, but I was also extremely creeped out by the whole thing. After that night, he never came back. I moved a few months after this. I never found out who he was or exactly what he was doing. I used to work a night shift at a small gas station that was in the city next to where I lived. My family knew the owner of the station, so I worked there on and off several times over the years. He would pay me pretty good, and he was a good guy, so I didn't mind. However, I would often work really late night shifts, as the convenience store was open until 2 a.m. At this particular time, this was around 20 years ago, and I was in my early 20s and living with my parents. One night when I was working, it was pretty quiet at the store. By now, it was after midnight, so the roads were mostly empty. Every now and then, a car would come by and get gas. I was by myself, just keeping busy by sweeping the floors and reorganizing the products. Other than the sketchiness of late nights, I actually liked it a lot. It was cool to have the entire place to myself, and it made me feel like I owned the store. From the window behind the counter where I would mostly be, it had a pretty good view of the road that went past the store. The road was, like I said, mostly empty at this hour, but I noticed one car drive by really slowly. I thought that the car would pull into the station because of how slow it was moving, but instead it continued down the road, and I noticed something else about it. The car was being driven by what looked like a clown. It stood out because it was obviously really dark, but this guy had his face painted completely white, so that stood out in the dark, and I remember seeing that he had a red nose as well. Also, he was driving this really tiny car, and he looked to be a taller guy, so it just seemed goofy. It wasn't like an actual clown car, but it was just like a really small vehicle. It slowly drove by, which I found interesting. But about 5 minutes later, he drove by again, going the opposite way. Overall, I didn't think much of it, but the clown would continue to then slowly drive back and forth about 5 more times over the next hour. I just kept seeing him coming back and forth down the street. I noticed him looking over at the store as well. I wasn't really sure as to what he was doing, but I found it to be pretty odd, and there wasn't much else going on at all. But the clown never did drive into the gas station. Eventually, I was off for the night. I finished up a few things and then locked the store and left. I got out to my car and then drove back home to my parents' house. This was about 10 minutes away in our neighborhood. By the time I got home, obviously everyone else was asleep. I entered the house, and not long after, I heard the sound of a car driving down our street. The street was normally very quiet, which is why I noticed it. I went over and looked out of a window to see that same clown in his car. Now I was freaked out. What was he doing here? I watched him slowly drive by. I stayed at the window. A short time later, he drove by again. I did not know why I kept seeing him. I didn't see him for a while, so I moved away from the window. I don't remember what exactly I did at this point, but I remember a while later I was back. I went to go to the window before going to bed, just to make sure that the clown was not driving by again. However, I noticed his car was now parked on the side of the road across the street, and the clown did not appear to be in it. Where could he be? I was now really nervous, wondering if he was in our yard someplace. I went to a bunch of different windows and looked out them. I didn't see the clown, but there wasn't great lighting back there at this hour. I remember at that point I wasn't really that tired yet, and I was always kind of a night owl, so instead of going to bed, I wasn't really planning on going to sleep anymore. Instead, I went into my bedroom and started playing video games until I would get tired. About 20 minutes or so into this, there was then a knock at our front door. I instantly knew that it was probably the clown. I got up and then went downstairs and looked out of a window. Sure enough, he was there. He did not knock again though. Instead, he just stood there for a while. Then he turned around and slowly walked back to his car and drove off into the night. After that, I never saw him or his car again. I was looking out for him at work and at home for the next few weeks, but I didn't see him. To this day, I still wonder about that.
This happened back when I was in 10th grade. I went to a high school that I would describe as pretty average. For the most part, nothing that interesting or exciting happened on a daily basis. Back then, I would ride the bus to and from school every day from my house, which was about 10 minutes away. One day in the spring, I was in my third period class. It was a writing class, and I always found it really boring. This day in particular was like many others. Towards the end of class, with maybe 20 minutes left, I got up and asked to go to the bathroom. My teacher said yes, and I left the classroom. I walked down the empty hallway to the bathrooms. They weren't that far away, just at the end of the hall and around a corner. As I was inside using the bathroom, I heard the door open. Nobody walked in though. Instead, I heard them say, "Is anybody in here?" When I heard this, I was confused. It was a bathroom with multiple stalls, so why would they ask that? I did not answer, and after like 2 or 3 seconds, the door shut. Whoever it was had left. It seemed like it was probably a teacher. I finished up, and as I was at the sink washing my hands, I heard the school intercom beep. Then there was an announcement that the school was now in a lockdown. I remembered they said that this was not a drill. I felt a little bit nervous when hearing that. Maybe that's why someone had asked if anybody was in the bathroom. I wasn't quite sure what to do. Was I supposed to stay in the bathroom or go back to the classroom that I had been in? I figured that it would be best to go back to the classroom. My teacher was probably wondering where I was. I left the bathroom, but I didn't want any teachers to see me, or I was afraid that I would get in trouble. When I got into the hallway, I saw that it was completely empty still. Things were also very silent. I walked down the hallway to go around the corner and back to the hall that my classroom was in. However, I heard footsteps as I got near. I wasn't sure who it was. Probably a teacher. I decided to move back and hope that they wouldn't see me, but the footsteps continued to get closer. I then walked back down the hallway and quickly turned the first corner to another hallway. When this happened, I heard the footsteps speed up. I was 100% sure now that they were following me. They didn't say anything though. I started moving even faster, and the footsteps got faster as well. Then, I started to realize that maybe this wasn't a teacher. Maybe this was somebody who wasn't supposed to be in the building. I turned another corner and was looking around for anywhere to go to get away. I happened to see a door that was open a little bit. I quickly got inside as the footsteps approached from around another corner. I shut the door, and at first, I couldn't see anything. The lights were off, but it looked like I was in some kind of closet. There was a bunch of stuff in there, like extra desks and boxes. I couldn't see well at all, but I could make out those things. I was completely silent, even holding my breath. I could still hear the footsteps, and they continued to get closer and closer. Eventually, they reached right outside of where I was, but they just walked past. I felt so much better when I heard that. I could hear them walking farther away down the hall at the same fast pace. The footsteps got quieter and quieter as they moved away. It then got very silent. I was feeling better and feeling like whoever that was now gone and it would be safe to leave. Just to be sure though, I was waiting a little bit longer. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a noise. But it was coming from behind me, inside the room that I was in. I turned around just in time to see a man in there, coming around one of the boxes. I couldn't see any details of who it was because of how dark it was in there, just that it was a man. I ran for the door as fast as I possibly could. Luckily, I was only a few feet away. I opened it and ran out into the hallway. I didn't look back and sprinted in the direction down the hallway that the footsteps had walked. Within a minute, I saw a man walking. He turned around looking confused. It was one of our teachers. I recognized him. I told him that there was a man hiding in the closet. We both went towards the front of the school where the main offices were. We were let into a room, and I found out that the police had just arrived. Within 20 minutes, they had found the man who had moved and was now hiding in a bathroom. He was, in fact, not supposed to be in the school, and was the whole reason that we had been under a lockdown. The footsteps that I had heard were just a teacher. I can't believe that I hid in the same room as that guy. Looking back, I definitely should have just walked straight back to my classroom. I'm a high school teacher. I teach math, and my classroom is on the first floor of the school. I've always had the classroom decorated with posters and other fun things to make it more interesting for the students. I love teaching and helping kids learn math, which can be a difficult subject for many. The time of this story was last year, during the 5th period of the day. I did not teach a class during that period, and was using it to grade assignments, which sometimes took quite a while. It was a warm and sunny day, and about 15 minutes into that period, I found out that the school was being locked down. I did what we were instructed to do, which was to lock the doors of our classroom and turn the lights out. I already had the blinds closed to my classroom, because the sun had been shining in and getting in my eyes. I was wondering why exactly we were under a lockdown, and I hadn't been given a reason. Still, I hoped that everybody was okay. Things were very quiet. I didn't hear or see anything unusual for a good 10 minutes. I was sitting at my desk in the corner of the room. Then, I heard something. There appeared to be a shadow of somebody walking right outside my classroom window. I had a set of windows that ran all the way along the back side of my classroom. It led to a part of the side of the school. Immediately outside of it was a grassy area with a few trees and a long line of bushes. I had never seen anybody walking right alongside the building like that. There was a sidewalk that was much farther away. Still, I could only see their shadow and not actually who it was, but it appeared as though it was a man. Right away, I had a bad feeling. Could this be why we were under a lockdown? Just after thinking that, I remembered something else. One of my windows was actually open. It was such a nice day that I had opened the window a little bit after the last class period had ended. It was on the opposite corner of the room from where I was. Should I risk it and get up from my desk? I would have to run all the way over there and then close the window. The man outside was also moving in that direction. It was clear that I wouldn't make it there before the person did, and I hoped that they would just walk past. But when they reached the window, I heard it start to raise. I saw a man's arm, and then I ducked down. I hid underneath my desk, where you would normally put your feet. Luckily, there was a wall blocking me from the other side, so the guy wouldn't be able to see me unless he came over here. But had he heard me? I wasn't sure. I tried to be as quiet as I could. I heard the man enter the classroom and stay by the window for a few minutes. My heart was racing. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to contact somebody, but I didn't want to make any noise. I was listening very closely to see if the man would move at all. He seemed like he was staying in the back opposite corner of the classroom. This went on for several minutes. I barely moved at all. Occasionally, I would hear slight movements from the man, but he never changed locations. I was pretty close to my classroom door, and I got the idea to leave. At first, it seemed like a crazy idea to me, but as time went on, I really wanted to leave the classroom. I decided that I was just going to go for it. Before I could, though, I heard the sound of the man moving. He was getting up and walking closer to me. My heart sank. I felt like I had missed my opportunity to leave. I should have got up and ran for the door sooner. I just hoped that the man did not know that I was in here with him, and also that he wouldn't look behind my desk. His footsteps got closer. Instead of walking over to where I was, though, he walked over to where the door of my classroom was. He remained there for a minute or so. Then, I heard the door being unlocked, and it opened. The man had actually left. The door closed behind him, and I waited for a few seconds before getting up and running back over to the door to lock it. Then, I called into the principal to let him know what had happened. I remained in my classroom, and about 10 minutes later got a phone call and was told that everything was now fine. The lockdown was lifted, and thankfully they had located the man. He had been seen suspiciously walking around campus, which is what caused the lockdown. I can't believe that he got in through my window. I'm sure to keep my windows closed now. This story happened when I had to go to Saturday school. I guess that Saturday school was sort of like detention. I was in high school, and I think that I was a junior. The way I got detention was that I forgot to return several of my school books. We were given books from the library that we needed for certain classes. When the semester was almost over, we were supposed to return the books on our own. However, I forgot, and I actually lost one of the books in my house. Eventually, I found it, and I returned all of my overdue books, but I still had to go to Saturday school. It really wasn't that bad, and pretty much just like study hall. It was just one classroom, which was one of the language arts classrooms. The teacher just sat at his desk and made sure that we all behaved. Occasionally, he let us know what time it was and could answer some questions or help us with problems if he could. I remember that the teacher was Mr. Sanders. He was a nice guy and overall pretty reasonable. I remember that my mom dropped me off at the school just before 8 a.m. on Saturday morning. Saturday school started at 8 and went until 12, but not everyone had to be there the whole time. I only had to be there for 2 hours, so I would get to leave by 10. I know that depending on what some of the kids did to get Saturday school, they might have to write papers or something like that. Other kids just had to work on their own individual homework or just study. I had to write a short paper on what I learned from not returning my books on time. I also brought a little bit of homework to do for another class. When I got there was only 4 other students. I recognized 2 of them, and the other 2 I didn't, and they were not in my grade. The ones I recognized were both pretty much troublemakers, kids who would skip class a lot or not turn stuff in. I felt sort of out of place because I was normally a really good student. At 8 a.m., Mr. Sanders shut the door and spoke to us for a few moments, then went behind his desk on his computer. I got to work and wrote the paper. It didn't take that long at all. Then I started doing my homework. I finished that too by the time it was 9:30 a.m. Then I got a book from Mr. Sanders' bookshelf in the back and started reading. I remember that it was a short time after I started reading that Mr. Sanders got up from his desk and said that he was going to the bathroom. He jokingly asked us all if we were going to be okay while he was gone. Then he left. Like a minute later, one of the other kids that was in the classroom got up and left as well. I wasn't quite sure what he was doing, but I didn't think too much of it. I just kept reading. But like 5 minutes later, the school intercom said that we were going under a lockdown. This seemed really strange. We all had no idea why we would be in a lockdown. There was hardly anybody at the school. It was a Saturday. Only one of the doors was even unlocked for people to come in on Saturdays. Most of us knew from lockdown drills that the classroom doors were supposed to be closed, locked, and the lights turned off. Then we were supposed to sit on the ground in the back of the classroom. The problem was that our teacher was gone. We looked around at each other, unsure of what to do. Then someone spoke up and said, "Should we close the door?" We decided that we would. I walked over and closed it, then locked the door. Someone else turned out the lights. We all started talking to each other, wondering what exactly was going on. If our teacher came back, we would let him in, but he most likely had keys with him. We weren't hearing anything from the hallways, but whatever the problem was could have been from anywhere in the school. A few minutes went by, and nothing happened. Then somebody tried opening the door. Thinking it might be the teacher, I got up and walked over to it. But by the time I got there and looked out, nobody was there. I went back and sat down at my desk again. We were really confused in the classroom now. Less than a minute later, it sounded like we heard some shouting in the distance. Then someone tried opening our classroom door, and that was followed by more knocking on it. I walked over once again, and this time looked out the small window. It was the kid who had been in our class earlier but left. He was yelling and asking to be let in. I was just about to open the door for him when I heard more shouting coming from down the hallway. I heard somebody say police. The kid ran away from the door down the hallway. For several minutes, we were as confused as ever. But the lockdown ended about 5 minutes later, and several police officers knocked on our door. We let them in, and they explained the situation to us. When our teacher, Mr. Sanders, had left to use the bathroom, the other student left the classroom to follow him. The student knocked the teacher unconscious by punching him from behind. A janitor heard the incident, and then the student ran. That sent the school into a lockdown, and the police were called. I'm glad that I didn't let that student back into the classroom. Mr. Sanders ended up being okay, but he had to go to the hospital with a minor concussion. I'm not sure what that kid's problem with Mr. Sanders was exactly, but I did hear that he had been suspended earlier in the year for fighting. That was the only time I went to Saturday school. My name is Mia, and this happened when I was in high school. It was my junior year, and I had just recently gotten my driver's license. I passed my driving test in the middle of the semester, and I had a car from my parents that I could drive. To park in the main school parking lot, you had to have a parking pass, and you had to buy them ahead of time, so I couldn't do that. Instead, I had to park in the lower lot, which was a little bit farther of a walk to the school. After you parked, you had to walk down a path that went by the baseball fields on one side and woods on the other. Then you would pass the football field and get to one of the main parking lots. I didn't mind this because I was just happy not to be riding the bus anymore, and I could drive myself. I remember that at this point in the school year, I would get to school when the sun was just starting to rise. On about the second day that I'd parked in lower lot, I was walking up to school and I saw this guy in the woods. He was standing like 3 or 4 feet in. At first, I thought maybe it was another student. It was still kind of dark out and I couldn't see really well. When I got closer though, I saw how it definitely was not a student, and this seemed to be a grown man, much older than high school age. He kind of looked over when I passed, and I looked away when I got closer to avoid a weird interaction. I walked to school and didn't think too much of it. But after school that day, I walked back to my car and saw the guy in the woods again. I had forgotten about him, but when I saw him again, I remembered. It was really strange to me. Why was he in the woods, and who was he? I left school and drove home. For a few days, everything was normal, and I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. I didn't see the guy at all. But then, on another morning, I was walking up the path and heard footsteps behind me. I didn't remember another student parking near me when I got out, so I looked back. I saw a grown man walking about 50 feet back, looking down at the ground. I couldn't tell for sure if it was the same man who had been standing in the woods before. I didn't get a good look at him either time, but this was most likely the case. Who else could it be? I looked back to where I was going, and I kept walking to my school. After that, I didn't see the man for the rest of the day. But the very next day, I saw him again. It was when I was leaving the school this time. By now, I was beginning to wonder why this man was hanging out around the school all the time. I knew he didn't work at the school, and it was really suspicious. This time, I saw him as I was almost down at the parking lot. He was standing there on the other side of the path, not by the woods this time. I passed him by and ignored him like I always did. But this time, when I entered the parking lot, I heard footsteps behind me. When I got to my car, I saw the man entering the parking lot, walking towards my car. He was still a good distance away, but it seemed as though he might approach me, so I quickly drove off. The next day was the last time that I saw the man. I arrived at school when I usually did. I parked my car, got out, and started walking up the trail to school. At first, I didn't see the guy, but as I kept walking, I heard the footsteps behind me. I looked over and saw him once more. I walked faster, and when I got to the school parking lot, the guy was still behind me. I sped up even more, and finally, I got to the doors and I entered the school. Once I got inside, I felt safe. I went to my first class of the day. About halfway through the class period, though, the school went into a lockdown. At first, none of us knew what it was for. I didn't suspect the guy at all. The lockdown lasted for a good 30 minutes or so. When it was over and we found out the cause, I couldn't believe it. All I was told was that a man had been found hiding in one of the women's restrooms inside the school. It was the bathroom that was located right by my locker. I knew it was probably the same man, and after that, I never saw the guy again. This story took place about 5 years ago. It was my senior year of high school, and I was working on a big test. It was for a science class, which was tough for me, but I studied hard for it. I remember that I finished the test much later than everybody else. I had completely lost track of time because I was so focused. By the time I realized that I was taking so long, the bell rang. Then I was tempted to hurry and finish, but I decided to keep taking my time and doing my best. I knew that it wouldn't be a big deal, and I would not get in trouble for being late to my next class. I finished the test, and my teacher gave me a pass to get to the next class of the day. When I left the class, the hallways were completely quiet and empty. It felt kind of weird. I walked the hallways to get to my next class, but only about a minute later, as I was still in the hallways, I suddenly heard an announcement that the school was being locked down. I started walking faster so that I could get to my class. I had no idea why there was a lockdown, but I knew that I didn't want to be in the hallways. When I turned a corner to another hallway, I suddenly saw a man standing in the middle of it. But it wasn't a teacher or employee of the school. I could just tell. This man had long, messy hair and was wearing clothes that appeared old and kind of dirty. I knew immediately that I needed to avoid him, but I would have to walk past him to get to my class. I was standing right in the middle of the hallway in plain sight of the guy, but he wasn't looking over at me. He was facing in another direction. I turned around and ran back, hoping to get out of his sight before the guy would look over. I hid around the corner and I waited. I didn't hear the man walking closer to me, which was good, but I didn't hear him walking at all. Then, suddenly, the man spoke. He yelled out and said, "Hey, I know you're right around the corner." When I heard him say this, I panicked. I really didn't think that he had seen me. After he said this, it sounded like he was starting to walk closer. I took off running in the opposite direction right away. I ran as fast as I possibly could. As soon as I started running, I heard the guy running after me. I wasn't really that fast, and I was afraid that the man would be able to catch up to me. I looked around for anybody else in the hallways at all, but saw no one. When I kept running, I turned corners from one hallway to the next. Nobody else was there though. The man seemed to be gaining on me, even though I was going my fastest. I decided to try and get out of the school again, and I ran for the west entrance of the school, which I was closest to. Then, finally, I saw a police officer by the door when I got there. When he saw the guy chasing after me, I saw him start to run over. The man behind me stopped chasing and ran in another direction and was now being chased by the police. I stayed by the door, and the man was caught several minutes later. The lockdown ended shortly after that. I really don't know who the guy was or what he was doing inside of the school. I didn't hear that much more about it afterwards. That was the scariest moment of my life though.
I'm a female. I work a pretty standard job in an office 5 days a week. One thing I really like to do, though, is cook. I cook dinner for myself almost every night. In order to do so, I go to the store for fresh ingredients probably every other day. Right on the way home from work, there's a Walmart only about a mile from my apartment, and I found that they usually have the cheapest prices, so I go there for produce and protein all the time. Sometimes I go to other stores, but by far the most common one for me is Walmart. This story takes place just a few months back. Like usual, I was stopping at Walmart after work. I would never get much, just like 4 or 5 ingredients usually, and sometimes whatever else I needed as well. I got off of work anywhere from 3 p.m. to 4, so I get to Walmart shortly after that each day. The store was usually sort of busy. One day, an employee by the produce area said hi to me. I mentioned this because the next time I was shopping, he said hi to me again when I was in the same area. Looking back, I hadn't really noticed him before, but I had never really paid attention to the employees. He was bald, had a small dark beard, and was sort of a big guy. He seemed very friendly, and the second time, he asked me how my day was going. We made very basic conversation for maybe 30 seconds before I told the man I better go, and I went on with my shopping. This ended up becoming a regular thing over the next couple of weeks or so. Every time I was shopping, this same Walmart employee would say hi and engage in conversation with me. I didn't mind it too much because he was always really nice, although when I was getting ingredients after work, I was sort of anxious to get home and didn't really want to chit-chat. The man did start to ask slightly more personal questions each time, like if I was coming home from work, where I worked, and where I lived, things like that. They were starting to weird me out a little bit. I wasn't sure if the man was just a really friendly employee or something else. I told myself he was just a nice guy, and like I said, it didn't really bother me. That was until one time I was walking through Walmart doing my usual shopping, and he approached me again. He asked me how my day was, and the usual. Then he asked me for my number. I was nice, but I told the man no. I was afraid he would get the wrong idea if I said yes. Besides, he should know how weird it sounded. I mean, come to think of it, I never really saw the guy doing any real work. He would always just be standing around and then talk to me. The man seemed offended when I said no. I started to try and explain my reasoning to the man, but he just turned and walked away as I started to speak. His whole body language changed. After he walked away, I resumed my shopping. He had gone further into the grocery aisles of the store, but luckily I didn't have to get anything back there. I was inside the Walmart shopping for maybe 10 more minutes before checking out and leaving. I remember that on that day, I parked in the back of the parking lot, and when I got inside my car, I noticed that the Walmart employee was inside a car not too far away from mine. I really have no idea how I noticed him looking back, but I'm glad that I did. I was assuming that he was either on a break or had just gotten off of work for the day. He did not appear to be looking at me, which I was glad to see. I pulled out of my parking space, only to see him pull out and exit the parking lot behind me. I watched in my rearview mirror, and he made the same 2 turns that I did to get back to my apartment. About a minute later, I was arriving at my apartment complex. I was kind of creeped out now because I was almost positive that this man did not live here. I drove around the parking lot of my complex a little and did not want to go straight to my building. I was really suspicious. The man's car trailed mine the entire time. When I realized that he was probably just going to follow me no matter where I went, I decided to leave. I did not know where I was going, but I needed to get out of there. I drove down the quiet road near the complex to a busier one. Then I signaled to merge onto a busier road. At this hour, that road in particular was really busy because it was almost 5 p.m. now and rush hour. With the man right behind me, I waited for a gap in the traffic. After about 30 seconds, there was one. But I waited until the very last moment and then pulled out. I basically cut the car off that was driving down the road, and there were several other cars behind it. The car honked at me, but the man behind me had no opportunity to merge at all. That allowed me to basically get away from the guy. I drove down the road for a very short time before turning. It was then that I had the idea to go back to the Walmart. I was fuming with anger. I drove straight back there and to the customer service counter. When I got there, I told them about how one of their employees had followed me home. This Walmart didn't seem to be the most organized, and they had to call up someone from the produce section to help. When I explained to them what had happened, they told me that nobody of that description works there. I realized that the man must have just put on a blue Walmart vest. Maybe he had worked at a Walmart in the past, or maybe he had just bought the vest online. Either way, he wasn't an employee of this store. I was even more creeped out now. They told me that they would keep an eye out for the man if he returned, which made me feel a very tiny bit better, but not a whole lot. After that, I very carefully drove back to my apartment again. Thankfully, I did not see the man or his car. I don't believe he knew which apartment building was mine either. Since that happened a few months ago, I have not seen the man. I also have not been back to that particular Walmart either. This happened last year. I was shopping at my local Walmart, just doing some typical shopping on a random weeknight. The store was pretty quiet, and it was probably like 8 or 9 p.m. I had been in the store for about 15 minutes or so, and I was in the aisle where they have the fitness items. I was looking at one of those massage guns. I wasn't planning on buying one that day, or even buying one at Walmart, but I had been considering getting one. When I walked by, I noticed it and stopped to read the box. I was in the aisle looking at it for a few minutes, and when I was doing so, I remember hearing some voices in the next aisle over. It happened to be a toy aisle, and this was at sort of the back corner of the store. I heard a man's voice, and then the voice of a child. At first, I paid no attention as I was looking, but soon I heard the man say, "I will buy you this toy if you come with me." I assumed it was the child's father at first, but I didn't really know why he would say that. I couldn't really make out what the kid said back to him, but I heard the man then say something like, "Your mom said it's okay." Then, I just had the crazy thought that maybe this wasn't the child's father. The man started saying, "Come on, let's go," a couple of times. I heard him starting to walk to the end of the aisle. I just had a really bad feeling about it. At the time, I didn't know if I was just being nosy or if I should do something. I decided to walk by the aisle and glance down it to see. I left the aisle that I was in and walked into the next one over, which was a toy aisle. And when I looked down, I saw a man wearing a black jacket and winter hat, holding the hand of a little kid and leading her to the other end of the aisle. Their backs were facing me. I was kind of thinking on the fly, and I said, "Excuse me," to the guy. He turned around and looked really surprised. I picked up some random toy from the shelf. It was some type of stuffed animal. I said I wanted to ask the man a question, if this would be a good gift for my niece. I then started walking over to them. He said he had no idea, and I said I thought he might know. I then asked if that was his daughter. He said no, and he was just watching her for the moment, but then said they really had to get going. Him and the child then walked away. I really wasn't sure if I should believe him or not. Maybe I was making too much of it.
I realized it probably was a reasonable explanation, and I turned and started to walk into the opposite direction. I was telling myself that nothing was wrong and I was just paranoid. But I'm not even kidding. About 30 seconds later, I heard a woman's voice calling out a name. For this story, let's just say the name was Sarah. The woman was calling out Sarah, not really loud, but enough for people in the aisles nearby to hear, including me. I walked towards the voice and found the woman a few aisles down and more towards the center of the store. When I reached her, I asked if Sarah was her daughter. She looked concerned and said yes. I had a terrible feeling, and I said that I might have seen her daughter with a man and I thought they might be leaving. We both started sprinting towards the front of the store. The good thing is that this was probably less than a minute since I had seen the man. When we made it to the front of the store, we saw the man and the child at the self-checkouts area. He was buying one of the toys for her. The girl's mother started shouting, and the man claimed he was just trying to be nice and buy the toy for the girl, but he quickly tried to run away after realizing nobody would believe that. He ran out the door and was able to momentarily get away. I was just happy that the girl was okay and back with her mother. It turned out that the girl had wandered off from her mother to look at toys while her mom was shopping in another area of the store. The mother had believed that her child was nearby, but had actually wandered off much further. I also found out that the guy was located not long after this at all. I remember this Walmart sort of where I live that used to be open 24 hours. I'm not sure, but I think there were a lot of Walmarts that used to be open 24 hours. All the ones that I've been to in recent years close at like 10 p.m. now though. Maybe the reason is because of things happening like the story I'm about to tell you. This was several years ago, probably about 2014. I remember that I worked a job back then with all kinds of crazy hours. I never really knew when I would get off of work, and some nights were really late. One time, I got off of work at close to 3 a.m. By the time I was done, I was exhausted, but also really hungry. On my way home, I stopped at the 24-hour Walmart to see what they had. There were no restaurants nearby that were still open, and I was just going to go down the snack aisle and maybe find something to drink as well. When I got inside, I made my way over to the food. The store was almost completely empty. I only saw a couple of employees here and there. When I got to the snack aisle, I browsed around for a little bit. I wasn't really sure exactly what I was hungry for. I often have a hard time deciding what to eat or where to get food from. I browsed for maybe 5 minutes, and then I had this feeling like I was being watched. It seemed a little strange, and I looked around. When I looked to the far end of the aisle, I saw a man standing there looking towards me. He was a sort of tall and skinny guy, wearing a black Adidas sweatshirt. When he saw me looking at him, he just kept standing there. He wasn't looking at anything on the shelves in particular. He looked away from me, but I thought the guy seemed really weird. I went back to looking at the food on the shelves and tried to make up my mind. I wandered into the next aisle over. There was more food in that aisle. I was there for no more than 10 seconds, and I noticed a man creeping around the corner slowly and then looking at me again from the end of the aisle. This was really strange. I grabbed a bag of trail mix and then made my way towards the back of the store along the side. Once I was at the far back corner of the store, I decided to walk back to one of the main walkways, but when I got there, the man was already standing there looking at me. I started walking all around the store, and the man seemed to be following me. He kept slowly walking around the store, trailing me wherever I went, and it was really frustrating. His face was almost expressionless the entire time, and he never spoke a word. Finally, I said, "Forget this," and I went to the checkout area. There was only one check lane still open, and I told the cashier that some guy had been following me around the store. The man did not follow me into the checkout, but instead wandered off into the clothing area that was across from the check lanes. She just kind of said, "Thanks for letting us know," and agreed that it was weird. I just wanted to get home, eat something, and go to bed. After I was done checking out, I walked down towards the exit doors. I was sure to scan over and make sure that the creepy guy was not once again following me. I was really happy to see that he wasn't. When I made it out the door, I walked through the parking lot to my car. My car was parked a little ways from the doors. It wasn't in the far back end of the parking lot, but it wasn't really that close either. The parking lot was mostly empty, but there were a few cars scattered all around, most of which I'm guessing were employees. Right as I was starting my engine, I looked up and noticed something. There was a man sprinting at full speed from the Walmart headed straight for my car. It was the same guy that had been following me around. The way that he was running was so fast, like he was running for his life, but he wasn't running away from anything. He was running for me. There was a second or two where I was so confused that I just watched him. That was until I realized he was going to reach my car very quickly. Then I put my car into drive and got out of there. I pulled away probably just a couple of seconds before he would have reached me. He kept running though, all the way until I was out of the parking lot and on the street. Then I was easily able to get away. I was really confused who the man was, why he followed me around in the store, and why he had ran full speed at me when I was in my car. The lesson I learned from this was to not go back to Walmart in the middle of the night. I'm a female, and this story took place about 4 years ago. I was at Walmart shopping. Back then, I went there all the time. On this day, I was only getting like 2 or 3 things. It was nighttime. The store was somewhat busy though. I was able to find what I needed pretty easily, and I spent a total of maybe 10 minutes inside the store. At one point though, a man came up seemingly out of nowhere and introduced himself to me. He was about 5'8" and had grayish hair. He asked me my name and what I was shopping for. I saw that he didn't work there, and he came across to me as a little strange. I spoke with the man for maybe a minute, but I told him that I had to leave. He was sort of creeping me out. When I walked away, I headed straight for the checkouts, and when I got there, I saw that there was only 2 other people in the self-checkout area that had maybe 6 registers. I went to one and began scanning my items. That's when I saw the man again. It looked as though he had followed me all the way from the aisle we were in together, and that aisle was on the whole other end of the store. When he got to the self-checkouts, he did not go to an open one. Instead, he walked straight up to me. Then, he offered to pay for my items that I was getting. I told the man no thanks, and I asked him why he wanted to do that. He said he was just trying to be nice, and I said thanks, but I would buy it for myself. Then the man walked away. But he wasn't buying anything at all. He just seemed to walk out and leave the store. I finished checking out and then walked away to leave. When I got outside, the first thing I saw was the man standing there. He said hi to me once again. It scared me, but I said hi. The man asked if I wanted to come over to his house. It was really awkward. I told him sorry but no, and I started walking away. At first, the man took a couple of steps towards me and was walking with me, but after about 5 seconds or so, he stopped. He did not continue to follow me, and I got to my car and drove home. This experience was creepy, and should have been enough for me to not go back to that Walmart, but I thought it wasn't that big of a deal. So this guy was a bit of a creep. So what? I continued to go back to that Walmart. I went there several more times with no problems. Probably about a month after this had happened though, I was shopping at the same Walmart once again. I was doing some typical grocery shopping, and it was like 8 p.m. I was in one of the first food aisles of the store, and I noticed the man was there again. When I first saw him, I recognized him, but had actually forgotten about what had happened. I didn't know where I had seen him before at first, and it took my brain about 5 seconds to remember. When I did, I knew I needed to get out of there. As I was starting to walk away, I saw him look up and notice me. I left the aisle and walked as far away from him as I could to the complete other end of the store. I still had a couple of more things to get in the grocery department, but I wanted to wait until the man was gone. Running into him again was something I needed to avoid doing. In the meantime, I started just looking around at random items on the side of the store that I was now on. There were far less shoppers over there, and it was quiet. I slowly walked down a few aisles, just kind of taking my time. As I was doing so, I noticed the man again. He seemed to be heading in my direction, but was still really far away. I knew that I had to get out of there. I started walking away as fast as I could, and I went down different aisles to block myself from the man's view. I just set my basket with several items in it on the ground and then left the store. There was no way I would have been able to check out without the man catching up to me. Once I left the store, I drove back home. After that, I did not return to that particular Walmart for some time. I believe that it was a total coincidence that I saw the man again there that night, but when he saw me, he was going to try to talk to me again for sure. He must shop there a lot, and I'm just glad that since then, I have never seen the guy. I used to work at a Walmart a couple of years ago. This was my strangest experience. I mostly worked overnights and would stock shelves. It was an easy job for me. I would start at like 9 p.m. and at first the store would actually be open, but would close only like 2 hours into my shift. There would never be very many customers in that time anyways. A good number of us worked overnights, because obviously Walmart is a really big store. On this one night, I happened to be working in the pets and supplies aisle, which is in the back end of the store. I had been working in that general area, but not that exact aisle earlier in the night, but by now it was about 11:30 p.m. Our store closed at 11, so we had been closed for 30 minutes now. As I was in the pet supply aisle, I was just stocking one of the shelves by myself. When the store closed, I would often put in headphones and listen to music while I worked, which is what I was doing. It helped work go by faster and easier for me. But out of nowhere, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It appeared as though somebody had walked by. I looked over, but they were now gone. I assumed it to be one of my coworkers, and once a few minutes went by, I kept working. Then, again, I saw somebody at the end of the aisle out of the corner of my eye. I looked over, and this time the person did not walk away. It wasn't one of my coworkers, though. It looked like just some guy that I had never seen before. When I looked at him, he disappeared behind the next aisle. I got up and walked over and then looked down the next aisle. When I did, I saw the man disappearing out of that aisle and into the one after that. I took out my headphones and then radioed in on my walkie that I thought I saw somebody inside the store who wasn't supposed to be here. After that, I kept doing my work. About an hour later, I went to the back room. That area was pretty large in our store, but I was the only one back in that section at the time. When I was walking over there, I was sure that I saw the man again. I could see him hiding behind a box underneath one of the shelves there. I didn't stare at him, and I acted like I never saw him. I was going to walk past, but I decided to turn around and then go the other way instead. He was maybe 30 feet away. When I began walking back, I heard noises behind me, even with my headphones in. I started running for the exit to go back into the sales floor. I heard footsteps behind me when I did. When I got there, I opened the door and the man did not come out after me. I ran to find the nearest employee. That was Al, who was working in the electronics overnight at the time. I told him that I saw a man in the back, and he decided to come back and see. I had a bad feeling, and I wondered if the guy was dangerous. We both went back there anyways. When we opened the door to the back, we heard the sound of another door opening. It was coming from one of the doors we had back there that opened up to the outside. They were rarely used. We walked in further, just in time to see the guy walking out of the store and the door closing behind him. After that, he was gone. I still don't know how the man got inside. My only guess is he somehow avoided all employees and hid inside the store until after we had closed. I also wonder what he was going to do to me when he was hiding in the back and then followed me. Luckily, I quit that job not too long afterwards. Back when I was in high school, during my freshman and sophomore years, I would ride the bus. It picked me up at the corner of my street early in the morning and would drop me off afterwards. I went to an average-sized high school about 10 minutes away from where I lived. At least, the place seemed average to me. There was probably about 700 or 800 kids combined in all 4 grades. This is something that happened during my sophomore year. It was a school day, just like any other to that point. One class had just ended, and I was going to my final class for the day. As I stood in the hallway near my locker, I talked with some of my friends. I had a decent friend group of several other guys. The locker commons were always really crowded in between classes, and I remembered that the first warning bell rang. That meant that you had 2 minutes to make it to class. Kids started leaving the commons, but me and a couple of friends stayed. My classroom wasn't really that far off. I remember that one of the guys there was a grade ahead of us, and his name was Jake. His brother was Tommy, and Tommy was in my friend group, so I think that's why he was there. As I was about to head to class, I heard another sound come over the school speakers. At first, I was thinking, how could the bell ring again so soon? But it wasn't really the same bell sound for when class starts. It was followed by an announcement over the intercom. We were told that the school was going into a lockdown.
All of us should go to our next hour classes immediately, and the teachers should lock the doors and turn off the lights. There was still kind of a lot of kids around, including the 4 of my friends. I heard one of them say they were going to just leave. Nobody wanted to sit in a classroom for who knows how long during a lockdown. One of the school exit doors was not that far away. There were already some kids leaving. I saw about 10 kids running for the doors and going outside, and more followed. There was only one class period left for the day, so I decided that I wanted to leave as well, but I didn't drive there. That's when Jake asked me if I wanted to leave. He said that he would give a ride home to anybody that wanted to because he was leaving. As he said this, he started to walk away. Half of my friend group was leaving, and the other half were actually going to their classes. Other kids were also leaving, and it became chaos. We had to leave fast if we were going to. I saw one of the teachers enter the hallway and start to tell kids to get to their classes. There were less and less kids around by the second. I decided to leave, but by that point, Jake and my other friends had already left. I remember the teacher yelling at the kids to stop leaving. There were probably like 50 that ended up making it out of the school. I was one of them, and when I got outside, my friends and I did not do a good job sticking together. Kids were literally running away to leave. They were going to the parking lots where students parked mostly, and some ran off through the grass towards a nearby neighborhood. The school was in an area that was mostly residential, but there were a few businesses down the road. There was a woods and all of the sports fields behind the school. The student parking lots were on the side, and then one was behind the tennis courts. When I got outside, I couldn't even see Jake or my friends anymore. It was basically chaos. Kids were running everywhere. A teacher took a step out of the school and told us all to come back inside, but nobody listened to him. I figured that Jake and my friends would be in the parking lot, so I ran in that direction. I had to kind of go around the school to get there, though. I wasn't sure which parking lot Jake parked in, so I went to the main one first. When I got there, he was nowhere in sight. I realized that it must be the other one, and I hoped that I wasn't too late. By now, most kids had made it to their cars if they were leaving. I sprinted for the other parking lot, but it was a ways away. When I got there, there was nobody. A lot of cars were still there, but I didn't see any students at all. I walked around, hoping that maybe my friends were in their car but hadn't left yet. Unfortunately, though, I didn't see them. I realized that they must have left without me. Now I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go back to the school because it was probably locked, and I wasn't supposed to leave in the first place. But I also couldn't go home because it was too far to walk and I didn't have a car. I started walking back up closer to the school, not really knowing exactly what I was going to do. I got to a back door of the school and tried going inside, but it was locked, just like I figured it would be. After this, I was going to go back around to the parking lot and then walk down the sidewalk. But when I turned, I saw some guy coming out of the school. I just knew that this guy had to be the reason for the lockdown. He was looking over his shoulder, was way too old to be a student, and definitely not a teacher. I was a long ways away from him, and I quickly ran behind a tree that was nearby. I was just hoping that the guy didn't see me. For a few seconds, I didn't bother to look and see where the guy was. I was expecting him to walk in another direction. But as I was still behind the tree, I heard the guy walking closer. I ran from behind the tree to the woods, which was maybe 20 feet away. There was no question that the guy saw me running into the woods. I was hoping that he wouldn't follow me. I got inside, went about 20 feet deep in it, and then ducked down and hid. I had no clue why the school had been locked down up until that point. I had been more concerned about leaving with my friends. After seeing a suspicious guy leave the school, though, I realized that I might be in actual danger. For a few seconds, I didn't hear anything, until I heard footsteps in the grass right outside of the woods that I was in. I couldn't take it any longer, and I got up and started running. I ran through the woods and then to the left. I didn't hear the guy enter the woods or anything, but I just wanted to get out of there. After like 2 or 3 minutes of running, I reached the edge of the woods, kind of near the street. I walked through the grass to the sidewalk and then ran down it. I kept going until I eventually reached a gas station. When I got there, I asked the employee working if I could borrow his cell phone to call my mom. I told him how my school had been locked down and everything. He let me, and I was able to wait there until my mom came and picked me up. Luckily, she worked not too far away from the school and our house, and was able to leave work without a problem. I didn't get in trouble for leaving school early either. The lockdown ended up lasting for the entire class period. In fact, students were kept there almost 10 minutes after the regularly scheduled time that school got out, so I didn't miss any class or anything. The man that I saw had entered the school, trying to pick up his daughter. It was a situation where he was divorced and hadn't seen his daughter in a long time and didn't have custody of her. He was also drunk and threatened a custodian when asked to leave. I'm not sure why he came over to me when I was in the woods, though. It was a really scary situation for me. This story takes place years ago when I was in high school. It happened after lunch period. The way my school worked is that we would have class, then lunch, then study hall. Class was an hour long, and lunch and study hall were about 25 minutes each. Your study hall classroom would be the same classroom that you had directly before lunch. But for me, I had gym class that period. It was 10th grade PE. The class was very easy and enjoyable for me. When we would have study hall, though, we would have to use a different teacher's classroom who had prep hour at that time. But a couple of times, we were unable to get the classroom, and then had to spend study hall in the gym, which was kind of weird. If that happened, we would sit in the bleachers or on the gym floor and do homework. Usually, the teacher would let us know before we went to lunch where it would be, and most of the time, we had a certain classroom. So on this school day, after lunch, I started heading back to the classroom. It was a decent ways away from the lunchroom on the other side of the school. I talked with some of my friends that I sat with at lunch for a while. My gym teacher was not very strict at all, especially with study hall. He didn't mind students coming back a minute or two late. The lunchroom cleared out, and I began walking back to class. The bell rang when I was still like a minute away. By then, the hallways were empty, besides me walking them. Soon, I got to the classroom. The door was closed, which was odd, and when I tried opening it, I couldn't. The door was locked. I also noticed that inside the window, the lights appeared to be off. I turned and walked away, realizing that we must be meeting in the gym today. I hadn't known, though. I remember thinking to myself, I don't remember being told that we were meeting in the gym. How did everybody else know besides me? I headed back towards the gym, and then I heard an announcement come over the school speakers. It said, "This is a lockdown, and this is not a drill. Please remain in your classrooms, and no students are to be out in the halls." I was about halfway back to the gym at that point. It still hadn't registered to me that the classroom had been locked down. I hurried up and made my way to the gym. When I got there, the doors were closed and locked. It was in that moment that I realized they were meeting in the classroom. I know I was a little slow on that, but I headed back to the classroom, now walking as fast as I could without running. I hadn't heard or seen anybody else in the hallways at all. It was completely quiet until suddenly I heard the sound of something hitting a locker around the corner. It was like somebody punched a locker or threw something up against it. The sound was very loud, especially to break the dead silence. I stopped in my tracks and no longer wanted to keep going to my classroom. I started walking in the other direction. In that moment, I heard footsteps coming from where I had heard the loud noise. My heart started racing. I kept walking and heard the footsteps continue. They were about to come around the corner now. I saw a staircase on the left and darted over and quickly went down the stairs. After getting down, I ran about 30 feet down the hallway to the first classroom that I saw. When I was there, I desperately started banging on the door. I didn't know what class this was, but I was hoping that they would let me in. After knocking a couple of times, I tried the door, but of course, it was locked. The teacher was not answering. I hoped that there was actually a class going on in there currently. As I waited, I heard whoever had been behind me now walking down the stairs rather quickly. I looked back and saw their legs appearing, but couldn't tell who it was yet. I didn't want to know. I turned back and kept banging on the door. Then, I heard the person behind me reach the bottom of the stairs and start walking towards me. All of a sudden, the classroom door finally opened. The teacher let me in and quickly shut the door once I was in the classroom. All of the lights were off, but I saw the students in the class were in the back of the room and on the floor. The teacher quickly locked the door, and then somebody actually tried opening it just a few seconds later. It must have been whoever had been following me. Then they banged on the door a couple of times. The teacher looked out the little window and then turned back and walked away. Some students started talking quietly. One of them asked me where I had come from. The teacher stopped everyone and said for us to all be quiet. I remember things got really silent for a while then. She went back over to the door and looked out again. I think by then the guy was gone. We remained locked down though for what felt like a really long time. I think it was almost an hour. Finally, the lockdown was lifted. I remember that I got called to the principal's office and had to answer some questions about what happened. They didn't really tell me much about the situation though. That was definitely the scariest moment of my time in high school. I don't know what would have happened if that person caught up with me. I don't want to know either. Back in high school, my junior year, I used to get to school about 15 minutes before it started. That's what time the bus would drop us off, and after getting inside, I would head upstairs to my locker first. Then there was this spot upstairs near the stairs that had a large window at the end of the hall. It wasn't that far from my locker either, and you could sit on the ledge in front of the window. My friends and I would sit around there just about every day and talk. It was kind of a routine, or a before-school hangout spot for us. It overlooked part of the parking lot and also the softball field next to the school to the east. We could also see the sun rising, and it lit up the inside really well. One day, I arrived at school, went upstairs to my locker, and then over to my friends by the window. There were about 5 of us or so there, and we chatted until the warning bell sounded. When we did, we all started to disperse to our classes. The hallways had been really crowded, but things were quickly becoming more quiet. I looked out the window and saw a few kids hurrying in at the last minute to make it to class. Then I saw this one guy hurry into the school. He was too old to be a student, and I didn't recognize him as a teacher. I thought maybe he was a substitute at first, but he was not dressed for the part. He just wore an old baggy-looking sweatshirt and sweatpants. He entered the school on the floor below, and then I headed to my class. I walked through the hallways down towards the other end. My classroom really wasn't that far away, and it was also on the 2nd floor. As I got there, I noticed down at the end of the hallway, the same guy who I had seen entering the school was now coming up to the top of the stairs. I went into my classroom at that point. Class went on as usual, as did my next few classes after that. Then came lunch period. I remember that as I was sitting with a couple of my friends at a table, I saw the guy again. He walked briefly into the lunchroom and then out another way. I was surprised to see him again, and I also thought that it was weird that I even noticed. The school that I went to was pretty large, with a lot of students, and it would be easy to blend in with the crowd. Later in the day, in my last hour, we were in class, and about halfway through, the phone in the classroom then rang. Our teacher picked it up at the desk. Afterwards, he told us that the school was being locked down. We had to get up and move to the back end of the classroom. Then he locked the doors and turned out the lights to the classroom. We were all really confused. I didn't even think about the guy that I kept seeing around the school earlier. I was as clueless as everybody else. All of us in the class were talking to each other, wondering what was going on. Nobody knew though. The teacher wouldn't tell us either. He just said for us to keep calm and to be quiet. About an hour went by, and finally, the lockdown was lifted. We still didn't know what was going on. School was let out, and we all went home. I rode the bus, and when I got home, my mom was there and asked me about the lockdown. I guess she had heard more about it than I did. I found out that a man, the same one who I had seen multiple times in the school, was the cause of it. During the last class period of the day, he was seen suspiciously walking down a hallway. The school was then locked down. Police were called, but unfortunately, the man was able to escape through an open window. Nobody knew who he was. I told my mom that I had seen the guy enter the school and had seen him again later multiple times. It blew my mind that the guy was able to fly under the radar for so long. He had been there since the start of the school day, but it wasn't until the last hour that anybody seemingly noticed him. I'm just glad that the guy didn't cause any harm. I don't know who he was or what he was doing. This story is from 2017 when I was a freshman in high school and bored in class one day. I was in my third period and was happy that I would be getting out of class later. I had an orthodontics appointment to get my braces adjusted, and my mom would be coming to the school to pick me up. The class that I was in was math, and it was quite boring to me, to be honest. I was just not a math guy in high school. Usually, I would just sit and look out the window and not pay attention very good. I sat in the back corner of the classroom, which was on the second floor of the school. That's what I was doing on this day, just looking out the window. The teacher was talking about math, and I was getting distracted by looking out the window into the front parking lot below. I was hoping that the pass would get there soon, then I could leave, and my mom would be there to pick me up. As I was looking out the window, I noticed several police cars driving down the street. They ended up turning into the front school parking lot. I thought that was a little bit strange. Me looking at this was interrupted, though, when the classroom door opened up. It was a student with a pass, and I knew that it was for me. The teacher paused, then took the pass, and then called my name. I got up from my desk, packed my things, and then headed for the front of the class. I took the pass, and my teacher gave me the homework assignment for the day, which I then stuffed into my backpack. Then I left the classroom and headed down the hallway. As I started walking, I got a text from my mom and saw that she was there at the side door. That's where you would get picked up from. It happened to be at the opposite end of the school, though. As I walked the empty hallways, suddenly I heard a sound come over the school intercom. I wondered what it could be. Immediately, I kind of had a bad feeling, because this was out of the ordinary. What followed was a message saying that we were going to be locked down. I was still a ways away from the side doors, but I really wanted to get there before I would have to stay in the school. I did not want to have to wait in a locked-down classroom and miss my orthodontics appointment. It wasn't really the appointment that I cared about, but if I went, my mom would let me take the rest of the day off of school. Plus, I was a little bit worried about why we were going under a lockdown. If I was in any kind of danger being in the school, I wanted to get out of there fast. I sped up my walking pace as I kept going down the halls. I hadn't seen anybody since I left my classroom, and I was hoping that I wouldn't see anybody either. If a teacher saw me, they would likely make me go into their classroom. When I was about halfway to the side doors, but still upstairs, I heard the sound of somebody walking down an upcoming hallway. I didn't have to go down that hallway, but it was going to intersect with the one that I would. Not knowing who it was, I chose to try and avoid them. I stopped, still a ways back from the corner, and kind of hid behind some lockers. The footsteps got closer and closer. I decided to just turn and walk in the other direction. When I started walking, it was like the footsteps suddenly started going a lot faster. I almost ran to the nearest corner and went around it. I didn't think that whoever it was would follow me, but they did. I heard them still coming closer. I literally ran for the stairs and went down them. Now I was thinking that there was no way the person behind me would go downstairs as well, but they did. I knew whoever it was following me. Probably a teacher, but I wasn't sure. I was in too deep now. It was clear to them that I was trying to run away. I turned at the first possible place that I could and went down another hallway. That one was very long and straight. It was complete silence other than my footsteps and the ones behind me. I started running to get to the end of the hallway. I heard the person behind me get to the bottom of the stairs and then start going down the hallway in my direction. When I finally got to the end of that hall, the only thing that I had to do was go around the corner and then make one more turn to the side exit. I looked back before going around the corner. I saw a man with long stringy black hair wearing a black leather jacket. I had no idea who he even was. When I saw him, I was really creeped out. I thought that it would have been a teacher, but this wasn't. I turned and sprinted away. I ran all the way to the side doors as fast as I could. When I got there, I burst out the doors and ran for my mom's car. I was able to make it there and get inside. I told my mom that we were in a lockdown and some guy was following me around the school. She called the school and reported it. When we left, we saw several police cars out front. Then I remembered seeing them enter the school grounds. It had to be connected. We went to my orthodontics appointment after that. But by the end of the day, I learned more details. The guy inside the school was fleeing from police.
They tried to pull him over earlier, and he led cops on a bit of a chase. After his car got stuck in a ditch, he got out and fled on foot. He ran for a while, and was able to momentarily get away from police until he was spotted on the school campus. Nobody thought that he actually got inside of the school, and the cops were mainly searching behind it, but they did send one officer inside. Eventually, he was located in a hallway of the school by the officer inside. Nobody was harmed. I don't think anybody knew about him following me around though. I'm so glad that I got away from the guy. I'm not sure why he was following me. I don't know if he was dangerous or not, but that's my scariest experience from high school. I'm currently a high school history teacher. This is something that happened a few years ago. It was a normal school day. I had just finished teaching a class, and it was going into the third period for the day. During this hour, I did not have a class. Each teacher in the department would get an hour where they didn't have a class. It was different for most teachers though. Usually, I would use this hour to grade assignments and prepare lessons. So on this day, when class ended and the next period started, I left my classroom. I was going to the teacher's lounge to make some coffee, and then I would go back to my classroom. Each department had a teacher's lounge. The history department at the school had 5 of us, so when I got to the room, it was empty. It was just a little ways down the hall and was between one hallway and another. It was sort of a weird room because it had 2 windows in it that looked out to the hallways. We had curtains inside though that were always closed so nobody could see in. I'm not really sure why there were windows in the room in the first place, but nevertheless, inside the lounge was a few couches, a table, some chairs, a fridge, and a TV. It was basically a break room. The floors were also carpeted, and it was comfortable in there. I took my time making coffee because I didn't really have that much work to do. As I was in there though, I heard over the school speakers that there was a lockdown. I was really surprised at first. In all of my time as being a teacher to that point, I had never seen a real lockdown. We had several drills, but never a real one. I was wondering what the reason was. To that point, it had seemed like a very normal school day. I decided to go to the doorway and open it up. If there were any students in the hallway, I would make sure that they got to a classroom. When I looked out into the hallway, I saw no one. It was very quiet. Then I went back into the lounge, got my coffee, and was going to head back to my classroom. But when I got to the doorway to leave, I looked out into the hallway and actually saw someone. It wasn't a student though, or another teacher. It was a man who was younger looking, but way too old to be a high school student. Probably mid to late 20s. He was walking in my direction. I decided to go back inside the teacher's lounge. My instincts were telling me that he wasn't supposed to be in here. After I got inside, I locked the door to the lounge. Seconds later, somebody tried opening it. Obviously, it was the guy who I had seen. I was really surprised that he tried going inside this room. Why would he want to go in the teacher's lounge? The guy then knocked on the door. I wasn't sure whether to answer it or not. For a moment, I was going to. Then I heard him say on the other side, "Let me in." The way he said it was demanding. It made me not want to let him in. I didn't answer, and instead got my phone out to call the principal. I wanted to ask why we were in a lockdown, and I wanted to know who this guy was. The guy knew that I was in here, so I called out asking him who he was. He didn't answer me, and just asked to be let in again. When I called the principal, he didn't pick up the phone. He was probably busy. I waited for a minute or so, and then called again. Meanwhile, the guy who had tried to go in the lounge hadn't knocked or said anything in a while, so I thought that maybe he had left. At least, that's what I was hoping. I tried to call the principal again, but as I was dialing, suddenly, I heard the sound of shattering glass. I looked over and saw that one of the windows to the break room was being broken. Some type of blunt object was crashing up against it. The curtains were still closed, so I couldn't see to the other side very well. Soon, the entire window was smashed. I stood there, kind of in shock. Then, I saw the man who had been in the hallway. He suddenly started to climb through the window and enter the room. As he was doing that, I sprinted for the door. When I got to it, I ran out and kept running until I had made it back to my classroom. When I got there, I unlocked the door and went inside, then locked the door behind me, all without looking back. Luckily for me, I didn't see the guy. I finally felt safe now that I was in my classroom, but the guy was still inside of the school. I called the police then on my phone, and I was told that they were aware of a lockdown situation at the school. Some officers were already on the way. After that, I didn't hear or see anything else. I waited inside of my classroom. The lockdown finally ended about 15 or 20 minutes later. The guy was caught by police when they found him still inside of the teacher's lounge. He had snuck into the school somehow and was on drugs. Aside from that, I don't know much other details. I'm not sure what his actual intentions were. I'm really glad that I got away from him though.
This happened when I was 15 years old and a sophomore in high school. I was hanging out with a couple of friends before school started. We were just standing around talking about dumb stuff that 15-year-olds do. Soon, the warning bell rang and we had to go our separate ways to attend our classes. I took my time heading to my class because my teacher, Coach Thompson, was pretty laid back and didn't mind if I was a bit late. He usually started class a few minutes late anyways because he was also a sports coach and was always busy with that stuff. As I made my way to class, the school bell rang again. School was now starting and I would be late, but I didn't think much of it and kept walking. The hallways were now empty. The intercom came back on and there was an announcement that the school was going under a lockdown. I couldn't understand why. I was pretty confused. Everything seemed fine to me. I kept walking towards my classroom, thinking it might be a false alarm or a drill. When I entered the hallway where my classroom was located, I stopped and froze. At the far end of the hallway, there was a large man wearing a ski mask and all black. He also had combat boots on and a huge black duffel bag around his shoulder. It took me a few seconds to process what was happening. The man in the ski mask hadn't noticed me yet, but then he turned his head and looked in my direction. I quickly ducked back around the corner, scared out of my mind. He had been standing right where my classroom was, so I couldn't go there now. The hallways were completely empty, and I started to panic. I knew the school pretty well, as I'd been there plenty of times prior to my sophomore year, so I went to the nearest place I knew, which was a nearby bathroom. I was hoping to stay safe in there until everything was over. I sat in a bathroom stall, trying to listen for any sounds, praying that the man wouldn't come inside. During the time in there, I was terrified, and I didn't dare make a noise. I stayed in the bathroom, trying to calm myself down from hyperventilating. For maybe around 30 minutes, I was in there. It was completely quiet, and I couldn't hear much. But at one point, I did hear footsteps, and it really freaked me out. I really don't know who it was, but luckily they moved past where I was, and then things went back to being silent. I just hoped whoever that guy I had seen was would not enter the bathroom. Finally, I decided that I would leave. I hadn't heard anything in the longest time. I thought it might be safer to get out of there, and I stepped out. When I did, I noticed the hallways were still empty and quiet. The lockdown was still in effect, and I had no idea what was happening. I cautiously started speed walking back towards my classroom, and I was very careful looking all around. I had made it about halfway back when I suddenly heard a noise that made me freeze. It was the sound of footsteps getting closer from the next hallway around the corner. It was happening all over again. I could feel the sinking feeling of the fear and the shock once more. I quickly turned around and went back down another hallway, trying to avoid whoever was coming my way. I glanced back for a split second and saw the man in the ski mask starting to come around the corner. In this point in time, I swear I could have ran a 4.3 flat in the 40-yard dash. For once in my life, I was genuinely running for my life, and nothing else mattered besides that. It was a weird feeling. I didn't care about anything, not girls I had crushes on, not my homework, not even my job. All I cared about was staying alive for myself. I kept on running. Eventually, I stopped, unable to hear the man behind me anymore. I gathered myself and started walking towards the exit, hoping to find a way out. When I reached the exit, relief flooded over me as I saw multiple police officers outside of the school. I ran for the door, and when they saw me, they waved me over. I was able to leave and breathe a sigh of relief. The man inside the school was later caught, but we never found out what his intentions were. The memory of that day haunted me, and my parents ended up putting me in therapy to help me out. No 15-year-old or anybody should have to experience anything like that. It's been about 7 years now, and I'm way better. We returned to our normal routines at school shortly after, and our school had a 24-hour cop for the next year. That made everyone feel a lot safer. I'm happy nobody got hurt, and I was able to make it out alive. I wouldn't wish that experience upon my worst enemy.
So this is a story about when I was 18 years old, and I had a personal encounter with a man who caused a lockdown at my school. It all started during the 4th hour of the school day. I was sitting in class, barely awake, when suddenly a noise came over the intercom. The principal said, "Attention students and staff, this is a code red lockdown. Please follow lockdown procedures immediately." My heart sank, as I would assume everyone else's did when hearing this. Our teacher then started telling us where to go. We all had to huddle up in the corner of the room. She then closed and locked the classroom doors and turned out the lights. At this point, everybody started whispering, wondering what exactly was going on. Obviously, we all wanted to know why we were under a lockdown. One of the kids in the class asked the teacher, but she wouldn't tell us. She only told us to stay quiet. The minutes turned into hours, which was awful, because locking a bunch of high school kids in a room without being able to move isn't such a good idea. Many students went on their phones, and others whispered and talked to each other. The classroom became a huge mix of confusion and anxiety. But as the hours dragged on, we sat there, and every noise we heard or thought we heard outside of the room scared us, but we didn't hear much. At this point, we were all convinced that there really was somebody out there with a weapon. Some students speculated about a potential intruder or an active threat, while others whispered about rumors they had heard. At one point, one of the kids in the class got up and couldn't resist looking out the classroom window. The teacher made him sit back down pretty much right away, but he claimed he saw a guy in a red sweatshirt walking down the hallway. I wasn't sure whether to believe him or not. Hours of waiting went by, and soon we reached just about the end of the school day. Then, finally, the long-awaited announcement came over the intercom. "The lockdown has been lifted. Please remain calm and proceed with caution." Everybody was so happy to be able to leave, and the classroom doors swung open. We all cautiously stepped back into the hallways. But the story didn't end there for me. Back then, I rode the bus to and from school, and I boarded it along with the other kids. As I rode the bus home, the events of the day replayed in my mind. The whole day just felt weird and off, and it made me more aware of the things around me for the rest of the day. When I got off the bus, I noticed that a ways back, a car was parking on the side of the street outside of my house, and I only lived with my parents, who were both at work at the time. The car wasn't like right in front of my house, but a little ways down. We also lived in a little more rural area, so the yards were bigger and there was a little more space. This also meant that we got less traffic through the neighborhood though. After getting off the bus, I quickly walked inside, hoping that the car would just drive away. When I got inside my house though, I checked out the window and the car was still there. I could see that somebody was inside of it, and it just gave me a bad feeling. I didn't want to take any chances. I called my parents, casually asking when they would be home, hiding the anxiety in my voice. They mentioned that they would be a couple of hours, which did not help my situation. I did not tell them about the car on the side of the street, because I didn't want them to worry, and I hoped that the car would drive away soon. Alone in the house, I hid by the window, peeking through the curtains. The car outside wouldn't leave, and it freaked me out. Trying to distract myself, I turned on the TV and put on a sitcom, but my eyes kept darting back to the creepy car outside. It just wouldn't leave. I decided that I wasn't going to look outside anymore. It wasn't doing me any good. Maybe 10 minutes passed, and I was just watching the TV. But then I heard a door closing outside. It was a car door. I quickly looked back out the window again, and this time saw a man getting out of the vehicle. He was wearing a red sweatshirt. I watched him start to walk up, right into our front yard. I ducked down and then ran away, sprinting for my bedroom. I got inside, closed my door, and hid under my bed like a little kid. I was terrified. My heart was racing, and I didn't know what to do. A few moments went by, and then I heard another sound. It was a knocking at my bedroom window. That just about made me jump up. Immediately, I took out my phone and dialed 911. Whoever was there was definitely up to no good. I told the operator exactly what was going on, and I was told that the police would be there shortly. In the meantime, I wasn't hearing any noises, and the man had knocked on my window just the one time. I was still scared as could be, though. A few more minutes passed, and I remained hidden under my bed. I had hoped that the man had gone away, but just as I was thinking that that may have been a possibility, there was a sound of glass breaking coming from the other end of the house in the back. The guy had broken in. I heard some more noise from that direction, and soon it sounded like somebody was inside. Then I heard another noise. It was police sirens. This was the best sound that I had heard all day. I heard the man inside the house turning around and leaving through the back the way that he had came. Less than a minute later, the police were there. Long story short, they actually caught the guy running away in the neighbor's backyard. The same man was also in fact the cause of the lockdown at my school earlier. Apparently, he had somehow gotten inside the school, probably before it started for the day. Somebody spotted him inside and the school went under a lockdown. I don't know how, but he was able to evade everybody and then leave the school without getting caught, likely escaping out of an open window. I still can't believe how he went to my house of all places afterwards. It makes me think that possibly the guy was stalking me. Either way, I'm glad I don't have to worry about it anymore. Alright, so picture this. I'm called in as a substitute teacher for a class that missed out on a field trip. The regular teacher and most of the students were out on the field trip, while I was left in charge of 4 students who didn't have their parent permission slips signed. To set the scene, I had just finished subbing for another class. Afterwards, I was asked to sub for this class, and the instructions were pretty straightforward. Play a Mythbusters video for the students, and hand out worksheets to keep them occupied. Sounds easy, right? Well, here's where things took an unexpected turn. Barely a few minutes into class with the video playing, the Fab Four, who seemed to be inseparable buddies, all raised their hands and requested to go to the bathroom. Now, being the laid-back sub that I am, I granted their wish, with a friendly reminder to return soon so we could finish the video together. They nodded eagerly, promising to be back in a jiffy, and headed out to the hallway as I paused the video. As I waited for them to return, a couple of minutes went by. Then, I heard a noise come over the intercom. There was an announcement that the school was now going in a lockdown, and this was not a drill. This put me in a little bit of an odd situation. Panic started to settle in as I realized that these 4 kids were nowhere to be seen. Should I go out and search for them? Or should I stick to the lockdown protocols and secure the classroom by locking the doors and turning off the lights? I figured my students should be back any second, and I stood there in my classroom doorway for about another minute or so. In a moment of concern for their well-being, I chose to go find them. I figured they must be hanging out in the nearest bathroom, right? Easy to find, or so I thought. I hurriedly made my way to the hallway, fueled by a mix of worry and determination. I walked to the bathroom as quickly as I could, and I got winded because I'm severely not in shape like I used to be, and I pushed open the bathroom door and knocked. I was hoping to find them and usher them back to the classroom. "Hey guys, we're on lockdown. You need to come back to the classroom," I called out, my voice echoing through the empty bathroom. But to my surprise, there was no response, not a peep. As confusion grew, I cautiously pushed the bathroom door open wider, half expecting them to jump out. But that wasn't the case. The bathroom was empty. Not a single person in sight. My heart sank. Where on earth did these students go? I couldn't dwell on it for long, though, because my priority was to get back to my classroom. If the students had wandered off, then that was their fault. They would likely be found by another faculty member. With a mix of anxiety and haste, I retraced my steps, making my way back to the classroom that I was in charge of. I went inside and remained by the door. 10 long minutes went by, which felt like a whole hour, and still there was no sign of my students. Just when I was about to lose my cool from all the suspense, I heard this weird noise coming from inside the classroom. I quickly scanned the room, hoping to figure out where it was coming from, but there was nothing there, just an empty and super quiet classroom. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then I heard it again. This time, my eyes locked onto this person crouched behind a desk at the back of the room. I cautiously approached, my voice trembling when I asked, "Who's there?" I was praying it was just a student playing an elaborate prank, but to my dismay, the figure that rose up from beyond the desk was no student. It was a man, a complete stranger, and certainly not a student. I freaked out and sprinted out of the classroom immediately, desperate to find help.
Now, as a grown adult, you're probably wondering why I bolted and didn't stay in the room and fight him. Well, like I said, I'm not as young as I used to be, and I'm not in shape, so the odds of me winning a fight protecting myself are like 4 out of 10. I pounded on the door of the nearest classroom, and thankfully, the teacher opened the door. Their expression quickly turned to concern as they listened to my explanation of what had happened. Without wasting a second, they dialed the school principal and alerted her about the new situation. Soon enough, the school became filled with activity as police officers were everywhere in the hallways. It turned out that the stranger I had encountered was the very person the school had been locked down for. He must have snuck into my classroom when I was down the hall looking for my students. This realization made my mind go black as I thought about all the possibilities that could have happened if I didn't run away from my classroom. It turned out that the missing students had taken refuge in another teacher's classroom. Nobody had thought to inform me, though. Rumors began to circulate that this intruder had ulterior motives, with whispers of him searching for someone specific or possibly carrying a weapon. The details remained vague, and the school kept the information tightly under wraps. Looking back on that day, I'm just grateful that everybody was okay. After that crazy incident, I needed some serious time off. When I finally went back to teaching, I had a whole new perspective. I will certainly never forget that day.
This happened back in my freshman year of high school. It was an average school day, just like any other for the most part. I remember I was sitting in my history class, which I think was the third period of the day. That's when somebody came to the door of the classroom with a note. I remember back at my high school, a couple of students would work for the office each hour and deliver passes to the students. The passes would usually be for the students to leave school for things like dentist appointments or whatever. When the student got to our class, she handed the note to my teacher, Mr. Watterson. He read the note and then called my name. I was really surprised, because I wasn't aware of having any reason to leave the school that day. I thought maybe I forgot about a dentist appointment or something, but my mother hadn't mentioned anything, and I know she would have. When my name was called, I looked around and then got up and slowly walked to my teacher. He said something like, "See you later, pal, here's the homework." Then, he grabbed the assignment from his desk and handed it to me. I took the note, which also served as a hall pass, and left the classroom. I remember that's when I read the pass for the first time. The note said something like, "I will be here to pick you up for your appointment at 10:30. Mom." I guess I had an appointment of some sort. It just seemed a little bit strange to me. Still, I guess I was happy to be leaving school. I walked through the empty hallways, making my way to the side entrance. There was a parking lot there, which is where people would get picked up by their parents. I got to the doors and went outside into the parking lot. There, I saw a minivan, but it wasn't my mother's van. It was a different model and color. I figured it was somebody else's parent, and my mother wasn't there yet. The time was not quite 10:30, but I think it was like 10:28 or something. I don't remember exactly. I stood there, looking around, waiting for my mother to get there. And then I saw the minivan that was sitting there with the engine running, and the front passenger's window started to roll down. I looked and saw a woman turn her head over and look at me. We made eye contact, and I could tell that she was going to say something. Then she did. The woman said that she was there to pick me up, and my mother had asked her to. She then said that she was a friend of my mother. I had never seen this woman before in my life, though. I may not have been the brightest kid in the world, but I sure wasn't that stupid. I was extremely skeptical. I asked the woman how she knew my mother exactly, and the woman replied saying something like, "We're just old friends." I then told the woman that I didn't feel comfortable going with her, and I was going to wait for my mother. The woman tried to get me to just go in the van. I then turned around to head back into the school. This situation was starting to feel really sketchy. The problem was, when I got back to the side doors of the school, they wouldn't open. The doors were locked. I had forgotten that all doors to the school were locked during the school day besides the front main entrance. Then, things got worse. I looked back to the van to see a side sliding door start to open up. I wasn't aware that anybody else had been inside of it. A man emerged and started walking towards me. The van was maybe 50 feet away at this point, as I stood right outside of the side doors to the school. I felt like my only option was to run away. I turned and ran around to the front side of the school. I didn't bother to look back at all to see if I would be chased. Back then, I could run pretty fast, and luckily, I made it around to the front end of the school pretty quickly. I kept running until I got to the front doors, and then I walked inside. When you first got inside the front doors at the school, There was a little window where a woman sat during the school day. She would ask you who you were, and you had to show her your student ID or whatever. She asked me for my ID, and as I got it out, I tried to tell her about what had just happened. I must not have explained it very well though, because she seemed pretty confused, and to be honest, the whole situation was pretty confusing. I got a hall pass from my mother to leave school for an appointment that I didn't know what it was. Then my mother wasn't there, but another woman was, and asked me to go with her. Then a grown man popped out of the side of the van. Believe me, I was just as confused as she was. After confirming my school ID, the woman at the window wrote me a pass to go back to my history class, and I was on my way. I walked through the empty hallways of the school, back to class. This was just about 15 minutes after I had originally left. When I walked back in, my teacher was speaking and there was a video that was paused on the board. I remember it was super awkward walking into the middle of class. Everybody was staring at me. They, as well as the teacher, were probably all really confused seeing me return soon after I had left. "Back so soon?" Mr. Watterson said. I just said, "Yeah, there was confusion and I didn't have to leave." I then sat back down at my desk and the lesson continued. Class only went on for about another 10 minutes after that, and then we were let out. My next period was English. This class was always pretty boring to me for some reason, but it was also fairly easy. I had Miss Gallo as my teacher, who was very nice. I got to class, and the day started like any other. But during this class, probably 20 minutes in, Miss Gallo got a phone call at her desk. She paused the lesson and answered it. When she hung up the phone, she told us that we were going into a lockdown, and she made it clear that this was not a drill. She seemed fairly concerned, and we all had to leave our desks and sit on the ground in the back of the classroom. We had no idea what it was about, and I truly had no clue either. I wasn't able to connect the dots for some reason. The lockdown went on for a good 30 minutes. Everybody was really quiet, and most people didn't say anything. Eventually, there was another phone call. Miss Gallo went over and answered it, and returned to inform us that the lockdown had been lifted. We were all relieved, and we finished up class, which didn't last too much longer. There was still another hour of school left at that point. By the time the school day was over, though, the word had spread, and I had found out what the lockdown was for. A man had walked into the school and completely surpassed the woman at the window asking for credentials. She asked him to stop, but he just blew past her without saying a word and walked into the school. He then disappeared into the hallways, and she had to call the office, who made the decision to lock down the school until the individual was found and identified. Unfortunately, he hid. It took about 30 minutes to find him, and the police had to be called. They found him hiding in the bathrooms that were right by my locker. And the craziest part was that it was the same man who had come out of the minivan that had tried to pick me up. This story remains one of the craziest things to ever happen to me. The woman and the man must have somehow created the note for me and tried to get me to leave the school. Who they were and how they found me, I truly have no idea. It really freaks me out to think about that part. Luckily, nothing like that happened again.
This was probably the scariest and most confusing thing that's ever happened to me. It still confuses me to this day. My little sister used to have dance practice every Tuesday and Thursday. My mom and I would bring her and go on little coffee runs at a nearby cafe. We enjoyed it a lot and loved to finally be able to hang out and talk without my little sister interrupting us. One Tuesday after school, we dropped off my sister at her dance practice and drove to the coffee shop. I got my usual, a chocolate chip cookie and a latte, and my mom got the same. Because we were usuals, we pretty much knew every worker there. This time, however, we noticed that there was a new employee. He looked to be in his early 20s and had a black hoodie and sweats. He seemed nice and served us normally. There was about one other person on the other side of the coffee shop, which was normal because there weren't a lot of people there usually. We sat down in the back corner where we usually sat, and I got started with my homework. Because of daylight savings, it was already dark out even though it was around 5:30 p.m. As I was doing my homework, I noticed that the new employee kept glancing over at our table. I didn't think anything of it and just thought that he was bored because they weren't very busy. I got pretty much finished with my homework and then put it away. At that point, the other person in the coffee shop got up and left, and the doorbell chimed. Now it was just me, my mom, and the new employee. My mom and I just talked for a bit about school and other random stuff. After a while, I had to use the restroom, so I went to the front counter to ask for the key. The guy handed me the key, and I noticed that as I walked over to the door, he was staring at me. As I was in there, I suddenly heard a rustling sound near the door. I looked over and saw the doorknob rattling. I was instantly scared and worried. I remembered to lock the door so whoever was there wouldn't be able to get in. I did my business and washed my hands. Luckily, whoever was at the door had stopped, so I would be able to get out again safely. As I walked out, the employee was still staring at me, though this time he looked angry. I handed him back the key and he didn't say anything. As I sat down, I realized that no one else had come into the store. That meant that there were only 2 people that could have done that, my mom and the worker. I told my mom what happened, and she confirmed that she had been sitting down on her phone the whole time and hadn't noticed anything. I was very suspicious now because I knew it had to be the guy, so I told my mom that we needed to leave. She agreed and shared my suspicion, and we walked out. We were just going to go sit in the car and wait for my little sister to be done with her dance practice. As we walked out, the guy was still staring at us, and I noticed him from a distance come out from behind the counter. For some reason, he then left the store with his hands in his pockets and his hoodie on his head, just watching us walk to our car. Once we got into the car, I looked back and saw that he wasn't there anymore. I hoped that he had gone back into the store and left us alone. The whole car ride to my sister and back home felt like I was being watched and followed, although I hadn't seen anyone since the coffee shop man. Luckily, we got home safely and haven't seen the guy since. That Thursday, we went back to the coffee shop and saw that the man wasn't there. One of the girls that we knew who worked there had a shift, so we told her about the situation and asked her if she knew anybody of his description. She told us that they had been closed Tuesday for personal reasons and didn't know anything about who I was talking about. That never made sense for me and still doesn't. My mom and I still talk about it to this day and can't seem to find an explanation about what happened. A few years ago, I worked at a coffee shop. This was a place that I worked at for a couple of years, and it was located in the city. We opened early, and for a stretch of time, I would be the first one to get there. I would arrive super early in what was still the middle of the night to start doing the tasks to get ready to open. The coffee shop was fairly large. It had the main behind-the-counter area for making drinks that ran along one wall. At the front of the shop, there was a large room with tables and chairs and some plants and bookshelves and things like that. But then we had the bathrooms at the end of that room as well as a storage area, and behind that area was a sort of back room. Not a back room for employees only, but another room with tables and chairs and stuff for customers. The entire place was filled with tons of decorations, and the furniture was very interesting as well. There were all kinds of chairs and couches and different sized tables and stuff. It was an interesting place. So one morning I arrived at my normal time. It was still dark out and I entered through the main doors. I left most of the lights off when I did the early tasks so that people wouldn't think the place was open. When I was starting things though, I soon heard some noises from the back room. It sounded like somebody else was there. I stopped what I was doing and listened, but the noises stopped. Then I continued, but about 10 minutes later, I heard the noises coming from that same area again. I'm not going to lie, I had not investigated before because I was too creeped out. I just hoped that it was my imagination or something like that, and I tried to ignore it. So this time when I heard it, I stopped and listened again. It wasn't that loud, but it sounded like someone walking around or moving in the back room. This time I called out, speaking loudly, asking if anybody was there. But when I did, it was just dead silence in response. I was really creeped out, and my coworker wouldn't be there for almost another hour, so I decided to check it out. I first turned on the lights near where I was so it would seem less scary. Then I walked over to the back area and turned on the lights there. It was hard to see everything because of all the decorations and furniture like I mentioned before, but I did not see anyone there. Once more, I asked if anyone was in the room and got nothing. There was a chance that whoever I heard was hiding or had gone into the storage room, but I was not going to be looking around. I just went back over and continued with my work, hoping that this would not be a bad situation. To that point, nothing bad had happened, and I didn't even know for a fact that somebody else was in there. So as I continued getting the place ready for opening, things were fine for a good 30 minutes or so. I was starting to feel better, and I was near the front of the place when I heard a door closing. This made me stop what I was doing again and listen.
After that, it was silence, and that all but confirmed to me that someone was in there. Doors don't just close on their own. There was no fan on and no wind that would close it. I couldn't tell which door it was, but I didn't want to check either. I did my best to just ignore things and keep working. Soon though, I heard some more sounds and I wanted to just leave. But I turned on every light and then texted my coworker. I still didn't see anyone, but she was already on her way and arrived just minutes later. When she got inside, we both felt a little more brave and looked around the entire shop together. It wasn't that thorough of a search, but it was just kind of glancing around in every room and looking behind a few places. We found nothing. As we were both at the front of the shop minutes later, we heard the back door to the place open. This was a door that was locked from the outside and a heavier door. For this to open, somebody had to be inside. The door then closed, and we could not see it from where we were. It shocked us both. Then we walked over and saw the door now closed. We looked out into the alleyway behind the shop, but nobody was there anymore. There would have been plenty of time for whoever was there to leave. After that, there were no more strange noises in the shop that morning. We opened a short time later anyways, and the day went by as normal. We never saw who was in there, and I still don't know. I went to a large university for college that I really enjoyed. Of course, it was a lot of work, but it was also a lot of fun. I made quite a few friends and have many good memories from college. One memory in particular, though, is not so much fun, but rather scary. It took place during my senior year. That year, I lived in an apartment with my roommate Jordan, and I had known her since we were freshmen. We had this tiny little apartment that was a few blocks off campus, and we would normally just walk to our classes every day. Also, there was this coffee shop that was a few blocks away in the other direction and down another street. My roommate Jordan had told me about it, and we would go there to study and get coffee sometimes. Even when Jordan couldn't go, I would go there to study quite often and do homework by myself. So one afternoon, I went to the coffee shop like normal, with my laptop and a few school books. I had gone there from our apartment, and Jordan was gone, I'm not sure where. The coffee shop was about average size, I would say. There was a good number of tables and chairs around for people to sit and do work. When I got there, it wasn't very busy, and I found a good table near a side wall. I was doing my work, and occasionally I would notice some of the same people at the coffee shop from time to time because I went there so much. As I was there on this day, at one point I noticed a man sitting at the table sort of across from me. He took out his laptop and went on it. I thought really nothing of it at all. I remained at the coffee shop doing homework and studying for a good several more hours. Finally, it was like 7 p.m. and dark outside when I decided to leave. So I got up and then started packing up my things. As I was doing that, I observed that the man that was sort of across from me also got up, and he started to pack up his stuff as well. Then, when I had my things together, I walked to the door and left. The man followed me out. These particular doors led to a small parking lot on the side of the building. When I got out into the lot, I was going to cut through it and then go on the sidewalk. However, just steps into my walk through the parking lot, and I heard the man speak behind me. I stopped and looked back. The man was walking behind me and asked if I needed a ride. I told him no thanks, I was fine. He then said something like, "It's kinda cold to be walking." It was a little bit chilly, but I had a jacket and was fine. But then the thought occurred to me, how does he know that I walked? I was still in the parking lot. How did he not know that one of these cars was not mine? I just said I was fine, thank you, and then he said okay, and I said bye. Then I walked away and began going down the sidewalk. The main road that the coffee shop was on would get somewhat busy during the day, but it was pretty quiet now. I had to walk along that for a short ways, and then I would cross over to a few quieter streets and walk the last couple of blocks to our apartment. When I walked back, things went fine. However, I was on one of the quieter streets nearing our apartment, and I heard a car coming up behind me. That part of the road sort of curved, and I looked over. When I did, I saw the car, and it drove past me, but it looked like the same guy from the coffee shop was driving. Now, I couldn't be sure because it was dark out and I only saw it for a second. It could have been any man, but I thought it was him. The car went past me and out of sight, and of course it made me wonder if that was a coincidence or not. But I continued with my walk home and eventually made it. When I got back in, I soon forgot about the whole thing. It was probably 2 or 3 days later I went back to the coffee shop. It was a little bit earlier in the day this time because of my class schedule. When I got there, I once more sat down and was doing my homework and studying. Not too long after I got there, I noticed the same man walking in. Prior to the last time, I had never seen him at the coffee shop before. The guy just gave me a bad feeling. I did not look at him and just focused on my screen, and the guy sat down in a similar spot as before, which was facing me but a ways away. Over the next couple of hours, I just focused on my work. Then I decided to leave. It was earlier this time, and I wasn't there as long as I had been the previous time. But still, when I got up to go, once more the man packed up his stuff right after me as well. I left, and then he left right after, almost identical to the previous time. This was kind of creeping me out now. When I was walking out, the guy once more asked me if I needed a ride. Once more, I said no thanks. He asked me if I was sure, adding that it was a kind of long walk. That got my attention. This time, I stopped and turned around. I asked the man if he lived in my apartment building or something. I thought that could be an explanation, although I had never seen him before in or around the building. Maybe he saw me and that's how he knew me. But he said no. Then I asked him how he knew that I walked to the coffee shop and how he knew how far away I lived. He paused for a moment before saying that he knew one of my friends. I asked him who, and he seemed nervous, but then said, Emily. I didn't have any friends named Emily. I knew he was lying. But I didn't confront him. I just said, oh, I see. Then I turned and walked away. The guy then went to his car. I walked back home, taking a different and longer route. I didn't notice the guy following me. After that, I stopped going to that coffee shop, and for the next couple of weeks, I was paranoid that the guy was stalking me or something. But thankfully, after that, I stopped seeing him. I still think that guy was a creep and up to no good. I used to work at this coffee shop that was not too far away from where I lived. It was a nice little coffee shop. It was located on this strip mall in town, and it's pretty well known. I was a manager there, and so I would often stay past close and be the last one there at night. We closed at 8 p.m. every night, so I'd often be there until around 9. One night I was working late, and things were quiet for the last few hours. My coworkers left, and at 8 o'clock we closed and I locked the doors. Then I was by myself to finish things up. The coffee shop has the seating area with tables and chairs at the front, and then a little bit to the side of the counter as well. Then there was the behind the counter area where we made the drinks, and connected to that was the back room area. I first went around and did a little bit of cleaning and organizing. Then I went into the back room to do some work. As I was back there, maybe a good 30 minutes after we had closed, I heard a knock at the door of the building. I first ignored it because I was not in view of the door, and whoever was there could not see me. I figured that it was just somebody checking to see if we were open, and they would realize that we were not and leave. However, they did not. The person was loudly trying to open the locked door and then started banging on it. When this continued for like over a minute, I decided to go see. I walked out from the back room and over towards the door. I'm not sure what this person was thinking because it was now almost 9 p.m. and our hours were clearly printed on the door. Plus, all the lights were out except for some small ones in the back. There was a man standing there by the door. He was wearing a hoodie and a winter hat. He looked at me and continued to knock on the door. I went closer but did not open it. Instead, I yelled that we were closed. This didn't faze the guy. He briefly stopped only to start knocking again and continuing to try to open the door. I yelled loudly again that we were closed, but he continued to knock, all without saying anything. I thought for a moment about going outside to tell the man that we were closed and making it clear to him in case he couldn't hear me or something, but I quickly thought better of it. I walked away, and before going back into the back room, I yelled at him to go away and I waved him off with my hands. He briefly stopped, but then continued knocking. I was now out of his sight again and figured that he would go away eventually. However, probably like 2 or 3 minutes later, I heard another really loud bang at the door. This was louder than before. And then I heard another one, and then another one. Then I heard the sound of glass breaking. The man had broken in. When I heard this, my first thought was to leave out the back door. Then I would call the police. So I started making my way for the back door, which led to behind the strip mall. When I was going there, I heard the man running in the shop, and he was heading in my direction. So I hurried up and went faster to make it to the back door. I was still able to make it there well before the man did, but I heard him still running closer to me as I left. When I got out the back door, I was now behind the strip mall, which was really just a back parking lot area used for deliveries. It went up against a tall wooden fence, and on the other side of that was the property of some other businesses. When I got outside, I was running as fast as I could, and I went back around the strip mall. When I had made it towards the side of the building, I heard the back door to the coffee shop open.
I could not believe it, but the man was actually leaving as well. I was still a good distance ahead of him, thankfully. I ran all the way around the parking lot and then sprinted for my car. I was able to arrive there and then got inside. Then I started my engine and drove away. When I was doing this, I saw the guy come running into the parking lot. After driving a few blocks, I called the police. Then I drove back after the cops had arrived. The man was gone by then, but the police found him walking down a sidewalk about a half-mile away sometime later. There was nothing stolen inside the coffee shop and no damage done other than the smashed window, which the man had used something to break it. So it occurred to me that apparently the man broke in just to go after me. I had thought in the moment that it was probably a robbery, but when I left, he left after me. That part really creeps me out, and I'm really grateful that I got away. This happened back when I was in college. It's a somewhat embarrassing story, I guess, but I will remain anonymous, so it's all good. I do think it's pretty creepy though, and it's worth sharing. So I was a freshman at a large university. I lived in the dorms and took a bunch of classes. Sometime during the first semester, I went to this campus coffee shop that we had. As a college student, I was never getting enough sleep, so I started drinking more coffee. And the campus coffee shop was a pretty nice place to study as well, and it was usually pretty quiet. One time, I was there studying by myself, kind of sitting in the corner. After being there for a while, I was mostly just paying attention to my studies. There was not that many other people there, but there was this one girl who was also sitting at one of the tables in another spot. I remember that after a while of more studying, the girl walked up to me and approached. I stopped what I was doing and looked up at her. She told me that she thought I seemed cool and wanted to come by and say hi. She introduced herself to me and I introduced myself to her as well. Right off the bat, she seemed really cool, and I also thought that she was cute. We talked very briefly for like 2 or 3 minutes. I just remember that she said she went to school there as well, and was a sophomore, I think. Then she said that she had to get going, but I should come to this other coffee shop the next night. She handed me this business card and said that it was a new place that had a grand opening recently and she liked it a lot. I don't remember the exact words, but I'm pretty sure that's what she said. I agreed, and then she just left. I hadn't thought to get her number or Snapchat or anything, but I did get a date and I would see her the next night. I looked at the business card. It said some type of event like game night or something like that, and it had the address and time, which was 8 p.m. So I went back to my dorm after that. The following day, I was excited to see the girl again because she seemed to like me. I didn't have that many friends at college yet, so it was cool to meet someone nice like her. The school was very large, so I didn't see this girl at all during the day, and it wasn't a surprise. When the night arrived, I left my dorm and walked to the address. I did not have a car that first semester in college, and the college town was mostly walkable. It's not in a major city, but it is in a city. It took me maybe 20 minutes to walk there, and I arrived a few minutes early. When I found the address of this coffee shop, it looked like an old house. However, the coffee shop was on the edge of a neighborhood, and also the edge of an area that had some other businesses. Overall, at this time, it was very quiet. I figured it was one of those coffee shops that was a converted old house, and it probably had lots of furniture and stuff inside, and probably a unique setup as well. So I walked up to the door and was surprised to not see or hear anybody else. Most of the windows appeared to be covered, but when I got to the door, it was unlocked. I would have loved to call the girl and know if she was there yet, but I did not have her number or anything. When I got inside, it pretty much just looked like an average old house. There was carpet inside and some furniture, but nothing that indicated it was a coffee shop. In fact, it didn't look like a coffee shop at all. I was confused. I made it a few steps into the house, and there was literally nobody else there, so I stopped. I stood there for a few moments just looking around. Then I heard someone walking from the other room. They were headed in my direction, and I didn't know who it was. I got really creeped out by that and just turned around and left. I could tell that it was not a coffee shop. I made it back outside and then quickly walked away from there. I jogged for a while and then walked the rest of the way back to my dorm. After that, I wondered what had happened. I went to the coffee shop on campus a few times in the next week, and I looked around for the girl, but I never saw her. Soon, though, I moved on. I was able to make some good friends in college, and I remember that I asked someone who was from the area about that house. We happened to be walking by to go to a different place, and when I saw it, I remembered. I didn't tell him the story, but I just asked him if that was a coffee shop, and he said no, it never was, and it still wasn't. It was just some house. He didn't know who lived there or anything, but that creeped me out. Looking back, I don't know whose house I was in,
and I don't know what exactly happened there. Was I being set up to be robbed or something? Or was it a prank, or some kind of misunderstanding? I never saw that girl again in my time in college, and the whole thing is still a bit confusing. My coworker, who was also my best friend, had just bought a new gaming PC and kept talking about it all week. I couldn't afford anything like that, so he offered to lend me his old setup. He said I could come by and grab it whenever since I had a key to his place. It was a little after 11 p.m. one night when I walked over to his apartment to grab it. That night my friend was still working for one more hour. He lived in the next building over, maybe a 3-minute walk. When I got to his place, the door was unlocked already. He did have a bit of a bad habit of not locking the door when he left, so I assumed he had done that yet again. I went into the living room where his gaming computer was set up so I could grab the old PC. When I entered the living room, I saw an older man was sitting in the recliner just reading a book. He looked strange, but he didn't look like a drifter. No one else had a key to my friend's place, so I knew right away this guy didn't belong. His eyes had this crazy look that I will never forget, like they were detached from reality. He turned to look at me, and I felt my blood go cold. He just smiled at me and closed the book. He stared at me like that for a few seconds before standing up and opening his arms out like he wanted a hug. I totally forgot about the PC, and I just sprinted out the door back towards my apartment after he started coming towards me for a hug. When I got back to my place, I called 911, and I stayed on the line with the dispatcher as they told me to lock myself in my room. Not long after, I heard a knock on my door for a few seconds before nothing. My bed is in the middle of my room, and the head of my bed is right underneath a window on ground level. I stupidly sat up against the window, wanting to see my whole room. I had my pocket knife with me, and I was holding it tightly in my hands as I sat in panicked silence. Suddenly, directly behind me, I heard a loud crashing noise as the crazy man broke my window from my backyard. I felt his arm then wrap around my neck as he started dragging me through my broken window, the shards of glass cutting into my skin. I slashed and stabbed my knife behind me blindly, and I heard the man curse in pain as his grip loosened. I stabbed his arm a couple times before wriggling myself from his grasp. Thankfully, the police arrived quickly, and they managed to get there as he was still dealing with the pain from the stab wounds in his arm, and the police managed to tackle him as he tried to run. The man was cuffed and placed in a patrol car, and I was taken to the hospital for the injuries I sustained from the glass on my window. The man didn't talk much at all before going to jail, and he said nothing useful. Neither me nor my best friend knew the man, but we assumed that he was there waiting for my friend to come home, and had his plan screwed up by me going to get the gaming computer. It was late 2021 when I moved into a small rental on the edge of town after changing jobs. I was a guy living on my own, and the place belonged to a coworker's uncle who had moved into an assisted living place, so the house had been sitting empty for a while. The rent was cheap, and it was only about a 30-minute drive to work, so I didn't ask too many questions. I just agreed to keep the place in decent shape and cover utilities. The house itself was nothing special. 2 floors, 2 bedrooms, a small yard, and a detached garage that I didn't really use. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older people, and there was not much traffic at night. About a week in, I noticed the side gate to the back door was open when I got home from work. I was pretty sure I had latched it that morning because I usually double-check things like that. I walked around the yard thinking maybe the wind pushed it open, even though it was one of those heavier wooden gates. Nothing else seemed off, so I closed it and didn't think too much about it. A few days later, I found it open again. This time, I was sure I had shut it properly before leaving. I checked around the yard more carefully, but didn't see anything missing or out of place. I figured maybe the latch was loose or broken, so I tied it shut with a bit of wire I found in the garage. The next morning, the wire I had used on the gate was untwisted and loose, and the gate was open again. I started thinking maybe someone was cutting through the yard for some reason and didn't know that the house was being lived in. It didn't make much sense though, since there was nothing behind the house except for another fenced property. I retied the gate, this time tighter, and left for work. That evening, I decided to check the garage since I hadn't really gone in there much. When I opened it, I noticed a couple of things had been moved around. There was an old chair that had been against the wall and was now closer to the door, and a small box of cardboard I remembered seeing in the corner was open. I started to think that there was a squatter who had been living on the property or in the garage while the place had been unattended. Maybe they didn't know I was living there now, or maybe they just didn't care. I called the owner and asked him if anybody else had access to the place. He said no, it was just me. That night, I was watching a show at 1 a.m. when I was surprised to hear the chattering of voices nearby. I listened intently, but couldn't hear what they were talking about as their voices seemed almost muffled and quiet. By this point, I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off my sofa and walked to the front door to make sure that it was locked. As I was approaching the door, I froze mid-step as I heard the two people approaching my porch and reducing their talking to a whisper. I realized right away that these people wanted to break in. I leaned against the front door and waited, expecting a loud bang against the door or the doorknob to be shaken, but it was oddly quiet. I decided to walk over to my window to see if they had walked away or changed their minds. My windows have bars from the inside out that you have to unlock so that you can move the curtains or look out the window comfortably. I slowly unlocked the bar mechanism and lifted it up. I moved the curtains then and was taken aback to see that leaning up against my window was a man. He was as startled as I was, and he tightened his hoodie over his face so all I could really see were his eyes looking at me. His friend realized what was going on and right away started to kick the door in. He kicked it a solid 4 or 5 times, but the door wouldn't budge. All the while I was staring at them, frozen in fear, trying to comprehend the situation. I snapped out of it and slammed the bars over my window, locked them, and then ran upstairs to the storage room where I then pushed the table up against the door and called the cops. As I listened and expected the two to come inside any minute, I heard a loud crash and the bars from the windows shaken aggressively. When they realized they couldn't get in, one of them let out a long, angry scream, but by the time the cops came, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was, but were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I wasn't taking any more chances, and shortly after, I moved out. What irritates me is this whole time I thought I was dealing with squatters, but I'm not so sure about that anymore, because after they saw me was when they got angry and tried to break in. This is one of my only scary experiences. It happened when I was 13 or 14. I was on vacation in England with my parents, my uncle, and his then girlfriend. We rented an Airbnb in Oxford for 3 nights, and it was on the first day. We just got there, and the adults went out to buy groceries. I was tired from the trip, so I decided to stay in the apartment. It had 6 rooms with a hallway, a bathroom, a kitchen, the living room, and 2 bedrooms on the sides. My room had 2 beds, one next to the door, and the other on the other side of the room under the window and next to the radiator. So anyways, I was now alone in the flat, and I started watching horror stories ironically. I was listening with the headphones on, but they were low quality so I could kind of hear through them. So eventually, about 10 to 20 minutes after my parents left, I started to hear voices. I paused the video and the voices stopped. 30 seconds later, the video was back on, and I heard voices again. So this time, I took my headphones off. I could still hear the voices. I assumed it might have been people from another flat on the same floor, but at one point they started to knock on the door and call out hello. I was alone, I was 14 years old, and I had just watched 2 compilations of horror stories in a row. There was no way I was going to answer the door, even if it was my door being knocked on. I put the video back on, but I was uneasy, so I wasn't really listening. Instead, I was focusing on the voices. Not a minute later, I heard the front door open. It couldn't be my parents. We're not native English speakers, and that accent was too good to be theirs. Even if they were playing a prank on me, it was not their voices. So I did what any reasonable paranoid 14-year-old would have done in this scenario. I grabbed my stuff that was on the bed, my phone and my daggers, since I had one that I would always take with me on trips. I hid behind the bed, in a small little area between the mattress and the wall near the radiator. Then I called my dad in tears, panicked, and whisper shouting so that he would hear me, but the intruder wouldn't know that there was someone in the apartment. Meanwhile, the intruder was opening every door and checking every room for some reason. My dad said he would be back in maybe 10 minutes, and he told me to stay hidden and quiet. Eventually, he hung up, but not 2 minutes after that, the person opened the door to my room, and I prayed that he would not walk straight towards me. And of course, with my legendary luck, he walked straight towards me. So I closed my eyes, breathed in, clutched my knife and phone, and got up, shaking. If I had to go down, I would go down fighting. When I faced him, I could just see the surprise on his face. He almost jumped when he saw me. I asked with a heavy French accent, "Who are you?" He had the audacity to answer that he was the owner of the apartment. I wasn't actually mad, I was just relieved that he was not someone trying to harm me. My dad got there like 1 minute later, during which the guy and I were still standing there, side-eyeing each other in awkward silence. I cried a lot while the guy almost cried and apologized over and over again. It turns out when we arrived, the boiler had died, and my parents called him to warn him, but managed to fix it after a while. The guy then came without warning them because he wanted to check the radiators. That's why he came straight towards me when he walked into the room I was in, because I was hiding right next to the radiator. But all is well that ends well, and now it's a funny story. This happened around late fall 2018. My parents had started traveling more for work, and every now and then I would stay at home alone in the house for about a week to watch over things. It was a quiet area, not rural, but not busy either. There were long stretches of road with only a few houses, and behind ours was a patch of trees that turned into a forest. I wasn't exactly fearless at my age. A year before, I had someone follow me while I was out running, and it stuck with me. Still, being at home usually felt fine. We had 2 large hunting dogs, and most of the neighbors kept to themselves, but looked out for anything unusual in the neighborhood. A few days before my parents left that time, someone mentioned a car being broken into a couple of streets over. It was enough to make me double-check the locks at night. My parents brushed it off, said stuff like that happens everywhere, and reminded me that we had security lights and dogs. On the 4th day of being home alone, I had to run out to grab some groceries. I went later than I should have, just before it got fully dark. The store wasn't far, so I walked, and I took the usual way back, cutting through a side street that connected to my neighborhood. On the way back, I noticed a man sitting on a bench. I didn't think much of it until I passed him and then heard footsteps behind me. At first, I assumed that he was just heading in the same direction as me. I just kept walking, trying to act normal, but I could feel him still following me. When I reached the corner near my house, I saw one of my neighbors outside taking out the trash. I walked straight towards him and said something random just to start a conversation. The footsteps behind me stopped. I glanced back quickly, and the man had already turned around, walking away fast. I told my parents later, and like usual, they told me I would be fine with the security lights and dogs. That night, I stayed downstairs with the dogs. Around midnight, everything was quiet. The dogs were lying near the couch, half asleep. I was on my phone when I heard something outside, a soft tap against the back window. A few minutes passed. Then there was another tap, this time from the side of the house. Someone was going around the house to each window, tapping on it or checking if it was unlocked. I turned off the lights without thinking and just stood there, listening to the next taps. Another knock, louder this time, on the front door. I could see the door from where I stood. A shadow close enough that it blocked the streetlight was right in front of the door. The door handle shook slightly, like someone tested it. I went back into the hallway, trying not to make a noise. My phone was already in my hand. I thought about calling the police, but I called my parents instead. There was a sudden bang against the door, hard enough to make the frame creak. The dogs started barking then, loud and sharp, but they stayed close to me instead of running up to the door. Another bang on the door, and then another. Whoever was outside wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. I ducked into the small laundry room and shut the door, locking it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. My mom picked up after a few rings finally. They could hear the banging through the line, and I told them while starting to cry that someone was trying to break into the house. The banging kept going the whole time I was on the phone, and at one point it sounded like someone hit the window next to the door. My mom told me to stay where I was and not to come out no matter what. My dad was already calling every neighbor who lived nearby, as the police would take too long to get there. After what felt like forever, I heard a car pull up outside, and then voices shouting at the man who was trying to get through the front door and window next to it. A minute later, there was a knock on the laundry room door. It was my neighbor who had a key to our house. When I came out, the front door had a dent near the handle, and the window beside it was cracked. My neighbors said they saw someone run into the backyard when they pulled up, heading towards the trees behind the house. They didn't bother to chase him in fear of being ambushed by him in the darkness back by the woods. We walked around outside later with flashlights once more neighbors arrived, and we had a big group, but there was nothing else to see. Just footprints in the garden near the back fence which the intruder must have climbed over to escape into the woods. My parents didn't let me stay alone in the house after that, and always had a plan for me to have some other adult staying with me. This story happened to my mother when she was in her mid-20s, sometime around 1979 or so, just a few years before she married my dad. She was living with a friend in an apartment on a shady street in Jackson, Mississippi. Her roommate was a musician, but she was out of town for the weekend and not expected to be back until the next day on Monday. On Sunday night, my mom went to bed, and she heard some rattling in the front room. She then heard the front door open. She thought that her roommate was back. However, as seconds went by, she wondered why her roommate didn't turn on the light and why she didn't say, "I'm back." Then, as she heard things moving around in the front room, she realized that she was in desperate trouble. There was one room between her and where the burglar was. There was a back door behind my mom near the kitchen, but it's always kept locked, and she didn't have a key. Being a religious person, she began to pray. Her mind became clear, and she thought the best thing to do would be to remain still and quiet. Maybe after he got the money out of her purse, he would leave. Still praying, my mom snuggled down into the pillow, but she was so frightened that she was shaking all over. She opened one eye to see the figure of a tall, dark man coming through the doorway. He was quite tall. She knew that he had to be over 6'4", because her fiancé was that height, and this guy was taller than that when he came through the door. As he walked towards her in the room, she still thought that she would try to remain still and quiet and pretend to be asleep. He stood at the foot of her bed and looked down at her, tilting his head from side to side as if trying to see her face. She decided that this could possibly be her last few minutes on earth. She cried out to God and said, "Father, Father, Father," and screamed as loudly as she could. When she stopped screaming, she realized that the huge man had walked back out through the front room and out the front door, closing the door behind him. My mom locked the door, turned on the lights, and realized that it was not a dream. Later, she called the police and made a report on the incident. It turns out the guy who broke in got less than $10 from her purse. They asked her to identify him through small pictures which showed only faces. Not having seen his face very clearly, she could not identify him, as they all seemed very much alike. She finally chose one of them. The detective had been a teaching assistant at the University of Southern Mississippi where my mom took classes, so she knew him. He looked rather disappointed at the picture she chose and said, "I wish you should have chose the man right there," pointing at another man. He's 6'6" and was just paroled last week. He lives 2 streets down. How could she have identified him if he was not shown to her lineup, but only a small picture of his face? Nothing more came from the incident or the police report. The next week, my mom read about a similar incident several blocks away. However, the woman did not survive, and they found her body on the lawn the next day. My mom stayed with another friend for several weeks. Even though her roommate was back, she didn't feel safe there for the time being. Some friends were critical of how she handled the incident, some saying, "I don't think I would have screamed," and other stuff like that. One friend said, "Don't you see what happened when you called out 'Father, Father'? He thought there was someone else there in the house with you, causing him to leave in a hurry." That's the story of how our Heavenly Father protected my mom that night over 40 years ago. I used to work as a delivery driver for UPS many years ago now. There is one memory that stands out as being the craziest and also the scariest thing that ever happened to me when I worked there. So I had been working there for over a year at this point. I drove a standard brown UPS truck and made deliveries around the city that I worked in. The city was pretty large, and it had a busy area and then a quieter area as well. After a long day of work, I was down to my last few deliveries for the day. It was getting later, and I was looking forward to being done and going home. So I remember I stopped in this neighborhood to make a delivery. I pulled over to the side of the road, got out, opened the back, got the package, and then went up to the house and delivered it. I went back and got in my truck after that and then left. So I then left the neighborhood and had a bit of a drive before the last spot where I was making a few final deliveries. In the process of driving there, within a couple of minutes, I started to hear what sounded like a noise coming from the back of my truck. At first, I just dismissed it, but I soon realized that it really sounded like someone or something was back there. It made no sense though. Why would there be a noise in the back of my truck? I kept listening to the sound, and it wasn't constant, but it was a sound that I had not heard at all prior to that during the day. It sounded as though someone was moving around back there, and the packages were moving around. I decided to see what was up. I happened to be driving on a pretty quiet road at that moment. It was sort of winding, and it was in the quieter part of town. To the right was a ditch and a bit of grass, and then woods. To the left was some houses that were fairly spread out. There was a good amount of space on the side of the road to pull over, and after doing so, I listened more. The noises quieted down, but it sounded as though someone was walking around in the back of my truck. I was pretty creeped out by this, so I got out and walked closer to the back. Then I shouted, asking if anybody was in there. No one answered me. I went to the back door and opened it just a crack. I yelled that if anybody was in my truck, the door was open and they needed to leave. But still, there was nothing. I didn't open the door all the way because, to be honest, I was too creeped out. After I said that, though, nobody left. I wasn't quite sure what to do. After about a minute, I decided to open the doors all the way and see. I went to the door and opened it. But as soon as I did, I was rushed. Whoever was inside the truck suddenly ran up and then kicked me. They came running really fast, and they kicked at me, and I would have been kicked right in the face, but I moved my head just in time. The kick got me in the shoulder and part of my head. It knocked me back, and I fell to the ground. A man then emerged, and I really barely saw him because it all happened so fast, but he then ran past me and into the woods. I watched from the ground as he quickly disappeared into the trees like a wild animal might. I was slightly hurt, but not bad. I got to my feet and then called the cops and went back inside my truck. Then I waited for them to arrive. By the time they got there, about 5 minutes later, I told them everything. However, when they searched around, the man was gone. I gave the best description that I could, but I didn't remember any great details. I was then able to finish and go home. I don't believe the man was ever found. It's one of the craziest things that I've ever seen. I'm not sure when exactly the man entered my truck. I think it was when I made the last delivery, because that's when I started hearing him. He could have been walking down the street or something and entered my truck when I was up at the house making the delivery. My back would have been to the truck at that point, and also the back of my truck would have been open. Plus, there were still some boxes in there that he could have hid behind, and it was dark in the truck as well, so I probably wouldn't have noticed him. But overall, it was just crazy how it happened. One time back when I was in high school, I was left home alone for a weekend. My older sister was off at college, and my parents were both going to a friend's wedding that was out of town. They left on Friday and would be back on Sunday. In the meantime, I would be alone at the house for that time. It was not a big deal at all, because I had been home by myself many times. I was, I believe, a sophomore, so I was still too young to drive, but I figured I would just hang out around the house after school during the weekend. After my parents left, I went to school, and then I came home and was by myself. It was a relaxing night of just watching TV, eating pizza, and playing around on my phone. I stayed up later than usual because I didn't have school the next day. I was in the living room with most of the lights out and the TV on at a low volume. I was watching YouTube or something on my phone and was going to go to bed soon as I started to get tired. It was probably after 10 p.m. or so, maybe later, and there was suddenly a knock at the front door. It totally took me by surprise, because obviously I was not expecting anyone. Being home by myself and with it being late at night, this made me a little bit nervous, but I honestly didn't think it was anything that bad. I really didn't want to answer the door regardless of who it was though, so I stayed on the couch hoping they would just go away, but they knocked again. I decided at that point to go and see who was there, so I got up and moved over to a window. When I did, I looked to see a man standing there by the front door holding a small box in his hand. He also had a hat that looked like it was from a delivery company. I felt super relieved when I realized that it was just a delivery guy. He knocked on the door again though, now for a third time. This time he said, "Delivery." I was a little bit confused, because first of all, it was late at night, but also, why could he not just drop the package and go? I guess some packages require someone to sign for it, but how could we be expected to do so at an hour when many people are sleeping? I wasn't sure what he was delivering either. I hadn't ordered anything, but my parents possibly could have. I figured they did. The man knocked again, and once more he said, "I have a delivery for you." I didn't think that he knew I was in there. It would have been impossible for him to see me, but I was figuring he wasn't allowed to make the delivery unless someone answered the door or something like that. So as much as I didn't want to answer the door so late at night, I also didn't want my parents to miss their package and have to go pick it up someplace. So I walked over to the door to answer it. When I got there, I was literally like a foot from the door and about to open it when I heard the man try opening the door from the other side. I froze. The guy was trying the handle. I could not believe that he was trying to just walk into the house. I certainly was not going to open the door for him now. He didn't stop there though. The man then basically seemed to throw himself against the door with his whole body. I heard a very loud thud. It was like he was trying to break the door down. I took a couple steps away. He did it again though. He was seemingly backing up a few steps and then ramming into the door with his shoulder or something to try to force it open. The guy really wanted to deliver the package, I guess. Either that or he was trying to break into the house, and the package delivery was just a ruse to get me to open the door. I figured that it was probably the latter. I did what really just came to my mind in that moment, which was to turn on the lights. One switch went to that front door area inside the house, and the other to outside. When I turned both these lights on at once, the man suddenly stopped. Then he started running away. I heard him leave the front door area, and then I looked out a window and saw him sprint out the yard and down the street. At that point, I called the cops. They came out and investigated, but the guy was long gone. I really didn't have a great description either. After that, they left. I was really nervous to go to sleep that night, but thankfully, the guy never returned. He was obviously a fake delivery guy. I think either he wanted me to answer the door, or he was just pretending to be a delivery guy to not look suspicious in case another neighbor saw him. Either way, it was extremely creepy. I also sometimes wonder if he knew that my parents were out of town because their car was gone, so the driveway was empty. So possibly, when I went to the door, he was startled not thinking anybody was home. When I was younger, I used to work for this local restaurant that was in my hometown. It was a place that was well known in the city, and I worked there for over a year. In my time there, I did several different things. At one point, I was the main delivery driver. We offered online ordering, or people could just call in and order as well. Even though we were not a pizza place, it worked pretty much the same way as pizza delivery does. I would go out and deliver the food to wherever. The town I lived in was pretty average for the most part, as some parts were busier and others quiet. So one night when I was working, we got an order for a delivery. I took it and was going to drive it to the address. At this point, it was a little bit later and things had quieted down. We would also be closing pretty soon as well. So I took the food, left the restaurant, and headed out to my car. Then I drove to the address. It was about 10 minutes away, in a quieter end of town. After driving to the neighborhood, I saw that it was pretty average looking. I had not been there before, but I found the address and parked my car on the side of the road out front. Now, this house had a fairly large front yard, and the house was normal looking for the most part. There were a good amount of trees in the area and just a few dim streetlights along the block, so the lighting wasn't the greatest. I stepped out of my car and took the bag of food. When I started walking up the driveway to the house, I realized that none of the lights appeared to be on. The house was almost completely dark. I made it up to the front step, only to see a piece of paper taped to the door that said, "Back door, please." I wasn't too thrilled to see that, but maybe the door didn't work or something. So I walked around the house back over to the driveway and I saw a side door, but that one also had a piece of paper on it that said, "Back door." So I walked all the way around the house and was now in the backyard. Here it was much quieter. The backyard was not very big, but it was fenced in with a wooden fence, had overgrown grass, and some random junk lying around the yard. There was also a good number of trees and bushes in the backyard. I felt kind of creeped out going back there. I located the back door though, and then knocked on it, as there was no doorbell to ring. I was just hoping that this would be a normal interaction, and that somebody would just come to the door, take the food, and pay me. Oh yeah, I should mention that the order had not been paid for yet. So I needed to get the money, and I couldn't just drop the food and leave like I wanted to. At first, nobody came to the door. The lights in the back of the house all appeared off as well. I nervously looked around. Everything was calm back there, and it was pretty quiet aside from the leaves blowing in the wind. I was about to knock again when I heard the sound of footsteps approaching the door from inside the house. I got even more nervous. Now, I had made many deliveries before, but for some reason I was way more nervous here. Then the door opened. There, standing in front of me, was a tall man who was wearing all black, including a ski mask. He had black shoes, sweatpants, a long-sleeved shirt, and then a mask covering his entire head aside from his eyes. I was really confused and creeped out, to say the least. The man did not say anything, but I reached out and handed him the food. He took it, and I told him the price. The guy still said nothing, but then waved me to come more inside. He took a few steps back into the house, motioning for me to follow. I stayed just outside the house and said, "No thanks, I can just wait here." I assumed that he was going to get the money. I didn't know if he was trying to freak me out, or if this was just his preferred clothing choice around the house at night. He then stepped back towards me, still motioning for me to follow. I remained where I was. Then he got even closer and reached out and sort of grabbed my arm. To be honest, it wasn't an aggressive grab, like he was trying to suddenly pull me into the house. It was more of an encouraging touch to say, "Come on in." But still, as soon as he reached out, I jumped back and just took off. I ran away, sprinting back around the house, and not stopping until I made it all the way back to my car. He did not chase after me at all to my knowledge, but still, I didn't care. I drove away and was so relieved to just be out of there. I made it back to the restaurant and told my boss of what happened. He was not mad or anything, thankfully, and he understood. Instead, we put the address on the Do Not Deliver list. In the rest of my time working there, I never delivered to that street again. Personally, that experience still creeps me out to think about it. I'm not sure what that man was doing or what his intentions were. Perhaps he was just trying to scare me and thought it was funny. But I would advise anybody ordering food to not come to the door with all the lights off, wearing all black and a ski mask. It might scare the delivery driver. I live alone in a pretty small house that I'm renting. I've lived here for a few years now. The neighborhood is large, but generally pretty quiet. Last year, something happened that was really creepy. I still think about it all the time. So, one night, I was by myself at home in the living room. I didn't have work the following day, so I was staying up really late watching a movie. It was probably like 2 a.m., and I sat on my chair by the couch, and I remember that I heard a car come driving down the street. This was not that unusual, but with it being really late at night, I glanced over out the window. The car drove slowly down my street and then pulled over across the street from my house and a ways down from it. When I saw this, I did not recognize the car, but overall, I didn't think too much of it. I turned my attention back to the movie. However, maybe 2 or 3 minutes later, I heard a car door open and close, and I looked back over. I now saw a man emerging from the vehicle. He was wearing pretty much normal clothes, but then a blue Amazon vest over it. I realized that he was an Amazon delivery driver. It was strange that he was making a delivery at 2 o'clock in the morning, but it actually does happen. There are many people who have stuff shipped overnight, and I knew that some people who deliver for Amazon do not even drive the Amazon trucks and use their own vehicles. So I kept watching the man just out of curiosity. However, I noticed that he crossed the street and appeared to be walking straight for my house. When he started to enter my front yard, I quickly ducked down from my chair. My windows were mostly covered by the shades, but there was still a fairly large open spot where I could look out or someone could see in. I went down onto the carpet floor and then crawled behind my chair that I had been sitting on. I hadn't ordered anything on Amazon Prime at all, so I didn't know why this guy would go into my yard. Also, he didn't have any packages with him. I thought maybe he would come to my front door, but the way he had been walking was just into the yard. Things were silent until I heard footsteps arrive just outside my front living room window, just feet away from me. I very slowly and carefully peeked around the corner of the chair, just enough to see. The man was standing there right outside my living room window, looking in with his hands on the glass. I moved back out of sight, hoping that he didn't see me. I didn't know what was going on. The man remained there, just looking inside my house for probably a whole minute or so. Then I heard him walking away. I didn't know if he was going to try to break in or what. I moved out from behind the chair and saw that he was no longer at the window. I went over to the window and looked to see the man walking through the end of my yard and now entering my next door neighbor's yard. I watched him go right up to their front window and start looking in it the same way he had been to mine. The man was there for probably 30 seconds. Then I heard a neighborhood dog start barking. I'm not sure where the dog was. I didn't have one, but it sounded like it was either one of the houses next door to me, across, or possibly someplace else. Either way, when this happened, the man suddenly backed up and then walked away. He kind of jogged across the street back to his car. Then, moments later, he drove away. I was glad for the dog barking and glad that he was gone. It was really suspicious behavior. I decided to call the police non-emergency line and report it. Unfortunately, I really didn't have any good information. I didn't get a great look at the guy with it being nighttime and dark out, just a very basic description. I also didn't get a license plate, but just a basic look of the car. I didn't even know the exact make and model, but I thought that it was still good to report it. I think that maybe he was possibly thinking about breaking in, or maybe planning to break in later. Either way, he did not. I haven't seen the guy since, and I'm hoping that he didn't break into anybody else's place. I'm not sure if he was an actual Amazon delivery driver that was up to no good, or just pretending to be one to blend in. Either way, I see no reason for an Amazon Prime delivery driver to be looking in people's windows so late at night. I'm a delivery driver and have been one for many years. The craziest thing to happen to me took place roughly 20 years ago. I had just made one of my last deliveries for the night. I drove a pretty large truck. It was a box truck, and I made deliveries mostly to businesses in the area. I would sometimes work into the night, not super late, but it was probably like 8 p.m. by now. Still, I would be getting off very shortly. So I had finished up a delivery to a company in the sort of industrial part of town and was now driving out of it. By now these roads were very quiet. There was a winding road and it had 2 lanes, one going each direction. I remember that I came around a bend to a spot that was mostly going through the woods. There had been a car driving behind me, but no other cars in sight. That is, until I came to this spot in the woods and saw a car driving super slow up ahead. It was going like 20 miles per hour. As I approached it, the car only went slower and slower. Being in a large box truck, I normally didn't make maneuvers of passing anybody, but I figured that I would have to go around this car because I didn't know why it was driving so slow. It slowed down to probably like 5 miles per hour, and I had to slow way down as well. I started to move into the left lane to pass the car, but then it quickly made a turn to the left as well, as if to block me. That's instantly what it seemed like it was doing. I was confused. The car then stopped completely, and so did I in my truck. Meanwhile, the car behind me drove right up to within a few feet of my truck and then stopped. I wasn't sure what to do. But then I saw the door open to the car that was blocking my way, and a man got out. He started aggressively walking towards my truck. Meanwhile, I heard the door open to the car behind me as well. I realized that these guys had me blocked in and were coming after me. The only thing I could think to do was to drive away. My truck was a lot stronger than their measly cars, so I hit the gas and went forward. I turned, and the guy was still running to my driver's door. I hit part of his car, but my truck was easily able to keep moving. The man then ran away back towards his car. I went around him and kept going down the street. This led to the car behind me, and then later the damaged car, both following after me down the road. However, as I was driving, I called the cops on my cell phone. I told them what had happened and where I was and where I was going. I was hoping that the cops would get there and pull everybody over. However, not long after this, the cars both turned off onto another road behind me. The police arrived a few minutes later. I didn't have license plate numbers of the cars, but one of them was damaged. I was hoping that the guy would be found, but I never heard anything more. I think those guys were going to try to rob me or something, but I really don't know. I just know they were definitely up to no good, and I'm just glad that I got away from them.
I'm a female. I work a pretty standard job in an office 5 days a week. One thing I really like to do, though, is cook. I cook dinner for myself almost every night. In order to do so, I go to the store for fresh ingredients probably every other day. Right on the way home from work, there's a Walmart only about a mile from my apartment, and I found that they usually have the cheapest prices, so I go there for produce and protein all the time. Sometimes I go to other stores, but by far the most common one for me is Walmart. This story takes place just a few months back. Like usual, I was stopping at Walmart after work. I would never get much, just like 4 or 5 ingredients usually, and sometimes whatever else I needed as well. I got off of work anywhere from 3 p.m. to 4, so I get to Walmart shortly after that each day. The store was usually sort of busy. One day, an employee by the produce area said hi to me. I mentioned this because the next time I was shopping, he said hi to me again when I was in the same area. Looking back, I hadn't really noticed him before, but I had never really paid attention to the employees. He was bald, had a small dark beard, and was sort of a big guy. He seemed very friendly, and the second time, he asked me how my day was going. We made very basic conversation for maybe 30 seconds before I told the man I'd better go, and I went on with my shopping. This ended up becoming a regular thing over the next couple of weeks or so. Every time I was shopping, this same Walmart employee would say hi and engage in conversation with me. I didn't mind it too much because he was always really nice, although when I was getting ingredients after work, I was sort of anxious to get home and didn't really want to chit-chat. The man did start to ask slightly more personal questions each time, like if I was coming home from work, where I worked, and where I lived, things like that. They were starting to weird me out a little bit. I wasn't sure if the man was just a really friendly employee or something else. I told myself he was just a nice guy, and like I said, it didn't really bother me. That was until one time I was walking through Walmart doing my usual shopping, and he approached me again. He asked me how my day was, and the usual. Then he asked me for my number. I was nice, but I told the man no. I was afraid he would get the wrong idea if I said yes. Besides, he should know how weird it sounded. I mean, come to think of it, I never really saw the guy doing any real work. He would always just be standing around and then talk to me. The man seemed offended when I said no. I started to try and explain my reasoning to the man, but he just turned and walked away as I started to speak. His whole body language changed. After he walked away, I resumed my shopping. He had gone further into the grocery aisles of the store, but luckily I didn't have to get anything back there. I was inside the Walmart shopping for maybe 10 more minutes before checking out and leaving. I remember that on that day, I parked in the back of the parking lot, and when I got inside my car, I noticed that the Walmart employee was inside a car not too far away from mine. I really have no idea how I noticed him looking back, but I'm glad that I did. I was assuming that he was either on a break or had just gotten off of work for the day. He did not appear to be looking at me, which I was glad to see. I pulled out of my parking space, only to see him pull out and exit the parking lot behind me. I watched in my rearview mirror, and he made the same 2 turns that I did to get back to my apartment. About a minute later, I was arriving at my apartment complex. I was kind of creeped out now because I was almost positive that this man did not live here. I drove around the parking lot of my complex a little and did not want to go straight to my building. I was really suspicious. The man's car trailed mine the entire time. When I realized that he was probably just going to follow me no matter where I went, I decided to leave. I did not know where I was going, but I needed to get out of there. I drove down the quiet road near the complex to a busier one. Then I signaled to merge onto a busier road. At this hour, that road in particular was really busy because it was almost 5 p.m. now and rush hour. With the man right behind me, I waited for a gap in the traffic. After about 30 seconds, there was one. But I waited until the very last moment and then pulled out. I basically cut the car off that was driving down the road, and there were several other cars behind it. The car honked at me, but the man behind me had no opportunity to merge at all. That allowed me to basically get away from the guy. I drove down the road for a very short time before turning. It was then that I had the idea to go back to the Walmart. I was fuming with anger. I drove straight back there and to the customer service counter. When I got there, I told them about how one of their employees had followed me home. This Walmart didn't seem to be the most organized, and they had to call up someone from the produce section to help. When I explained to them what had happened, they told me that nobody of that description works there. I realized that the man must have just put on a blue Walmart vest. Maybe he had worked at a Walmart in the past, or maybe he had just bought the vest online. Either way, he wasn't an employee of this store. I was even more creeped out now. They told me that they would keep an eye out for the man if he returned, which made me feel a very tiny bit better, but not a whole lot. After that, I very carefully drove back to my apartment again. Thankfully, I did not see the man or his car. I don't believe he knew which apartment building was mine either. Since that happened a few months ago, I have not seen the man. I also have not been back to that particular Walmart either. This happened last year. I was shopping at my local Walmart, just doing some typical shopping on a random weeknight. The store was pretty quiet, and it was probably like 8 or 9 p.m. I had been in the store for about 15 minutes or so, and I was in the aisle where they have the fitness items. I was looking at one of those massage guns. I wasn't planning on buying one that day, or even buying one at Walmart, but I had been considering getting one. When I walked by, I noticed it and stopped to read the box. I was in the aisle looking at it for a few minutes, and when I was doing so, I remember hearing some voices in the next aisle over. It happened to be a toy aisle, and this was at sort of the back corner of the store. I heard a man's voice, and then the voice of a child. At first, I paid no attention as I was looking, but soon I heard the man say, "I will buy you this toy if you come with me." I assumed it was the child's father at first, but I didn't really know why he would say that. I couldn't really make out what the kid said back to him, but I heard the man then say something like, "Your mom said it's okay." Then, I just had the crazy thought that maybe this wasn't the child's father. The man started saying, "Come on, let's go," a couple of times. I heard him starting to walk to the end of the aisle. I just had a really bad feeling about it. At the time, I didn't know if I was just being nosy or if I should do something. I decided to walk by the aisle and glance down it to see. I left the aisle that I was in and walked into the next one over, which was a toy aisle. And when I looked down, I saw a man wearing a black jacket and winter hat, holding the hand of a little kid and leading her to the other end of the aisle. Their backs were facing me. I was kind of thinking on the fly, and I said, "Excuse me," to the guy. He turned around and looked really surprised. I picked up some random toy from the shelf. It was some type of stuffed animal. I said I wanted to ask the man a question, if this would be a good gift for my niece. I then started walking over to them. He said he had no idea, and I said I thought he might know. I then asked if that was his daughter. He said no, and he was just watching her for the moment, but then said they really had to get going. Him and the child then walked away. I really wasn't sure if I should believe him or not. Maybe I was making too much of it. I realized it probably was a reasonable explanation, and I turned and started to walk into the opposite direction. I was telling myself that nothing was wrong, and I was just paranoid. But I'm not even kidding. About 30 seconds later, I heard a woman's voice calling out a name. For this story, let's just say the name was Sarah. The woman was calling out Sarah, not really loud, but enough for people in the aisles nearby to hear, including me. I walked towards the voice and found the woman a few aisles down and more towards the center of the store. When I reached her, I asked if Sarah was her daughter. She looked concerned and said yes. I had a terrible feeling, and I said that I might have seen her daughter with a man and I thought they might be leaving. We both started sprinting towards the front of the store.
The good thing is that this was probably less than a minute since I had seen the man. When we made it to the front of the store, we saw the man and the child at the self-checkouts area. He was buying one of the toys for her. The girl's mother started shouting, and the man claimed he was just trying to be nice and buy the toy for the girl, but he quickly tried to run away after realizing nobody would believe that. He ran out the door and was able to momentarily get away. I was just happy that the girl was okay and back with her mother. It turned out that the girl had wandered off from her mother to look at toys while her mom was shopping in another area of the store. The mother had believed that her child was nearby, but had actually wandered off much further. I also found out that the guy was located not long after this at all. I remember this Walmart sort of where I live that used to be open 24 hours. I'm not sure, but I think there were a lot of Walmarts that used to be open 24 hours. All the ones that I've been to in recent years close at like 10 p.m. now though. Maybe the reason is because of things happening like the story I'm about to tell you. This was several years ago, probably about 2014. I remember that I worked a job back then with all kinds of crazy hours. I never really knew when I would get off of work, and some nights were really late. One time, I got off of work at close to 3 a.m. By the time I was done, I was exhausted, but also really hungry. On my way home, I stopped at the 24-hour Walmart to see what they had. There were no restaurants nearby that were still open, and I was just going to go down the snack aisle and maybe find something to drink as well. When I got inside, I made my way over to the food. The store was almost completely empty. I only saw a couple of employees here and there. When I got to the snack aisle, I browsed around for a little bit. I wasn't really sure exactly what I was hungry for. I often have a hard time deciding what to eat or where to get food from. I browsed for maybe 5 minutes, and then I had this feeling like I was being watched. It seemed a little strange, and I looked around. When I looked to the far end of the aisle, I saw a man standing there looking towards me. He was a sort of tall and skinny guy, wearing a black Adidas sweatshirt. When he saw me looking at him, he just kept standing there. He wasn't looking at anything on the shelves in particular. He looked away from me, but I thought the guy seemed really weird. I went back to looking at the food on the shelves and tried to make up my mind. I wandered into the next aisle over. There was more food in that aisle. I was there for no more than 10 seconds, and I noticed a man creeping around the corner slowly and then looking at me again from the end of the aisle. This was really strange. I grabbed a bag of trail mix and then made my way towards the back of the store along the side. Once I was at the far back corner of the store, I decided to walk back to one of the main walkways, but when I got there, the man was already standing there looking at me. I started walking all around the store, and the man seemed to be following me. He kept slowly walking around the store, trailing me wherever I went, and it was really frustrating. His face was almost expressionless the entire time, and he never spoke a word. Finally, I said, "Forget this," and I went to the checkout area. There was only one check lane still open, and I told the cashier that some guy had been following me around the store. The man did not follow me into the checkout, but instead wandered off into the clothing area that was across from the check lanes. She just kind of said, "Thanks for letting us know," and agreed that it was weird. I just wanted to get home, eat something, and go to bed. After I was done checking out, I walked down towards the exit doors. I was sure to scan over and make sure that the creepy guy was not once again following me. I was really happy to see that he wasn't. When I made it out the door, I walked through the parking lot to my car. My car was parked a little ways from the doors. It wasn't in the far back end of the parking lot, but it wasn't really that close either. The parking lot was mostly empty, but there were a few cars scattered all around, most of which I'm guessing were employees. Right as I was starting my engine, I looked up and noticed something. There was a man sprinting at full speed from the Walmart headed straight for my car. It was the same guy that had been following me around. The way that he was running was so fast, like he was running for his life. But he wasn't running away from anything. He was running for me. There was a second or two where I was so confused that I just watched him. That was until I realized he was going to reach my car very quickly. Then I put my car into drive and got out of there. I pulled away probably just a couple of seconds before he would have reached me. He kept running though, all the way until I was out of the parking lot and on the street. Then I was easily able to get away. I was really confused who the man was, why he followed me around in the store, and why he had ran full speed at me when I was in my car. The lesson I learned from this was to not go back to Walmart in the middle of the night. I'm a female, and this story took place about 4 years ago. I was at Walmart shopping. Back then, I went there all the time. On this day, I was only getting like 2 or 3 things. It was nighttime. The store was somewhat busy though. I was able to find what I needed pretty easily, and I spent a total of maybe 10 minutes inside the store. At one point though, a man came up seemingly out of nowhere and introduced himself to me. He was about 5'8" and had grayish hair. He asked me my name and what I was shopping for. I saw that he didn't work there, and he came across to me as a little strange. I spoke with the man for maybe a minute, but I told him that I had to leave. He was sort of creeping me out. When I walked away, I headed straight for the checkouts, and when I got there, I saw that there was only 2 other people in the self-checkout area that had maybe 6 registers. I went to one and began scanning my items. That's when I saw the man again. It looked as though he had followed me all the way from the aisle we were in together, and that aisle was on the whole other end of the store. When he got to the self-checkouts, he did not go to an open one. Instead, he walked straight up to me. Then, he offered to pay for my items that I was getting. I told the man no thanks, and I asked him why he wanted to do that. He said he was just trying to be nice, and I said thanks, but I would buy it for myself. Then the man walked away. But he wasn't buying anything at all. He just seemed to walk out and leave the store. I finished checking out and then walked away to leave. When I got outside, the first thing I saw was the man standing there. He said hi to me once again. It scared me, but I said hi. The man asked if I wanted to come over to his house. It was really awkward. I told him sorry but no, and I started walking away. At first, the man took a couple of steps towards me and was walking with me, but after about 5 seconds or so, he stopped. He did not continue to follow me, and I got to my car and drove home. This experience was creepy, and should have been enough for me to not go back to that Walmart, but I thought it wasn't that big of a deal. So this guy was a bit of a creep. So what? I continued to go back to that Walmart. I went there several more times with no problems. Probably about a month after this had happened though, I was shopping at the same Walmart once again. I was doing some typical grocery shopping, and it was like 8 p.m. I was in one of the first food aisles of the store, and I noticed the man was there again. When I first saw him, I recognized him, but had actually forgotten about what had happened. I didn't know where I had seen him before at first, and it took my brain about 5 seconds to remember. When I did, I knew I needed to get out of there. As I was starting to walk away, I saw him look up and notice me. I left the aisle and walked as far away from him as I could to the complete other end of the store. I still had a couple of more things to get in the grocery department, but I wanted to wait until the man was gone. Running into him again was something I needed to avoid doing. In the meantime, I started just looking around at random items on the side of the store that I was now on. There were far less shoppers over there, and it was quiet. I slowly walked down a few aisles, just kind of taking my time. As I was doing so, I noticed the man again. He seemed to be heading in my direction, but was still really far away. I knew that I had to get out of there. I started walking away as fast as I could, and I went down different aisles to block myself from the man's view. I just set my basket with several items in it on the ground, and then left the store. There was no way I would have been able to check out without the man catching up to me. Once I left the store, I drove back home. After that, I did not return to that particular Walmart for some time. I believe that it was a total coincidence that I saw the man again there that night, but when he saw me, he was going to try to talk to me again for sure. He must shop there a lot, and I'm just glad that since then, I have never seen the guy. I used to work at a Walmart a couple of years ago. This was my strangest experience. I mostly worked overnights and would stock shelves. It was an easy job for me. I would start at like 9 p.m., and at first, the store would actually be open, but would close only like 2 hours into my shift. There would never be very many customers in that time anyways. A good number of us worked overnights, because obviously Walmart is a really big store. On this one night, I happened to be working in the pets and supplies aisle, which is in the back end of the store. I had been working in that general area, but not that exact aisle earlier in the night, but by now it was about 11:30 p.m. Our store closed at 11, so we had been closed for 30 minutes now. As I was in the pet supply aisle, I was just stocking one of the shelves by myself. When the store closed, I would often put in headphones and listen to music while I worked, which is what I was doing. It helped work go by faster and easier for me. But out of nowhere, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It appeared as though somebody had walked by. I looked over, but they were now gone. I assumed it to be one of my coworkers, and once a few minutes went by, I kept working. Then, again, I saw somebody at the end of the aisle out of the corner of my eye. I looked over, and this time the person did not walk away. It wasn't one of my coworkers, though. It looked like just some guy that I had never seen before. When I looked at him, he disappeared behind the next aisle. I got up and walked over and then looked down the next aisle. When I did, I saw the man disappearing out of that aisle and into the one after that. I took out my headphones and then radioed in on my walkie that I thought I saw somebody inside the store who wasn't supposed to be here. After that, I kept doing my work. About an hour later, I went to the back room. That area was pretty large in our store, but I was the only one back in that section at the time. When I was walking over there, I was sure that I saw the man again. I could see him hiding behind a box underneath one of the shelves there. I didn't stare at him, and I acted like I never saw him. I was going to walk past, but I decided to turn around and then go the other way instead. He was maybe 30 feet away. When I began walking back, I heard noises behind me, even with my headphones in. I started running for the exit to go back into the sales floor. I heard footsteps behind me when I did. When I got there, I opened the door and the man did not come out after me. I ran to find the nearest employee. That was Al, who was working in the electronics overnight at the time. I told him that I saw a man in the back, and he decided to come back and see. I had a bad feeling, and I wondered if the guy was dangerous. We both went back there anyways. When we opened the door to the back, we heard the sound of another door opening. It was coming from one of the doors we had back there that opened up to the outside. They were rarely used. We walked in further, just in time to see the guy walking out of the store and the door closing behind him. After that, he was gone. I still don't know how the man got inside. My only guess is he somehow avoided all employees and hid inside the store until after we had closed. I also wonder what he was going to do to me when he was hiding in the back and then followed me. Luckily, I quit that job not too long afterwards.